Okay. Thank you all for joining. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're watching. If you can hear me, if everything sounds okay, just let me know in the comments. And we'll get going. Okay, got the thumbs up, got the stamp of approval from everyone. So let's get this going. This is day 6 of the January 6th committee hearings. We weren't supposed to have a hearing today, but I guess this surprise emergency hearing was called yesterday afternoon. So with less than 24 hours notice, we weren't supposed to hear anything from the January 6th committee until July. So this was called, again, with like a moment's notice, and it was because there were witnesses that we had to hear from that had important information. Reporting has just come out that we now know who those witnesses are going to be, or we now know who one of the witnesses is going to be. It's going to be a woman named Cassidy Hutchinson. She's an aide to Trump's then chief of staff, Mark Meadows, who himself has become, one of the most prominent figures in this entire investigation. We've seen text messages from Mark Meadows' phone, obviously, on the actual day of the insurrection. We know that members of the Republican caucus, we know that Fox News hosts, we even know that Don Jr. had all texted Mark Meadows seeking to get Meadows to talk to Trump to call the whole insurrection off. That's obviously significant in its own right because it proves that these people who would go out publicly and say, oh, we think this was Antifa, we think this was a false flag, we think this was the FBI, that in reality those people knew that Donald Trump was responsible. Otherwise, if Trump wasn't responsible, why were all of those people behind the scenes in private text messages so hell-bent on trying to get Mark Meadows to talk to Trump to call it off? If it was Antifa, why would Antifa take their orders from Trump? So, of course, these people all behind the scenes knew that Trump was responsible. Mark Meadows was very, very, very often the pass-through guy, the guy who all of these people sought to connect with while they were attempting to actually get to Trump. So Mark Meadows has proven extremely useful in all of this, but he still refused to appear. The committee had held him in contempt. But Cassidy Hutchinson, one of his aides, is appearing, and so she seems like she's going to be more important in all of this in terms of understanding Meadows' role in all of this. She was always in the room, though, which is, obviously one of the key factors in terms of the committee bringing her in. And she's been featured in video clips prior to this, and yet, this will be the first time that she's appearing in person. She's testified for roughly 20 to 25 hours already for the committee. So again, a very prominent role in all of this she's taken. Today we're hearing from the January 6th committee that it would present, quote, recently obtained evidence and receive witness testimony. So a little bit of a muted response from the committee in terms of what we should expect. But I think just the fact that they called this committee hearing out of nowhere when we weren't supposed to hear anything for a couple of weeks is telling in its own right. So that's what we should hear from Cassidy Hutchinson. Again, for the people who've just joined, Cassidy Hutchinson is expected to appear today. That's an aide to Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows. someone who up to now has already been one of the most useful figures in this investigation, according to the January 6th committee. Norm Eisen, who I'm sure many of you follow on Twitter, said Cassidy Hutchinson might turn out to be the next John Dean. I'd be cautious of setting expectations too high. Obviously, we've been in a similar position before where we've seen outright proof of criminality, and there's a difference these days in terms of what people are willing to accept, the degree of criminality that people are willing to accept if the person committing that criminality is on their own team. So I would just proceed with caution. Also, one other interesting point about Cassidy Hutchinson is that she testified that she was involved in conversations with Matt Gaetz, Mo Brooks, Andy Biggs, Louis Gohmert, and Scott Perry, all of whom had sought pardons from the White House, because that's how you know they're innocent, because all of them sought pardons from the White House. This is why when all of them go out on Fox News and OAN and Newsmax and they log into their little Twitter accounts and tweet about how this is all a hoax and there's no proof of any wrongdoing, and yet all of these guys had all sought pardons because Jamie Raskin himself calls it declarations of consciousness of guilt. These people all knew what they were doing, and yet they did it anyway because their intent was not to tell the truth about anything. It wasn't to uncover nefarious behavior or instances of fraud that the lamestream media is not covering. It's because they knew that what they were doing was illegal. That's it. This isn't rocket science here. If you request a pardon, it's probably because you've broken the law. So the fact that we've heard in these last hearings that Gaetz, Brooks, Biggs, Gohmert, Scott Perry, we even heard an indication that Marjorie Taylor Greene had requested one, although the wording was a little iffy on that. So I'm not 100% sure on that one. But in any case, all of these people knew exactly what they were doing. They were seeking to break the law and give themselves cover for having done it. So we'll hear from Cassidy Hutchinson today. I do want to go over, by the way, it's 9 o'clock Pacific, noon Eastern. We have about an hour until this hearing begins. So this hearing will begin in 1 hour. I'll do my pre-show until then. So that's where we're at right now. This will start at 10 a.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. And by the way, you can throw questions in there. I'm going to do a brief overview of what we found out from previous hearings, and I think important things that we should be remembering. But in the meantime, if you do have questions, throw them in the chat there, and I'll try to answer them so that I'm not just talking at you for an hour here. And while I'm waiting for those questions, I should take this moment. If you're not yet subscribed to my channel, if you could please subscribe. That is the best way to support what I do. I'll host these live streams for all of the January 6th committee hearings. So to be notified when we have a hearing come up, just subscribe to my channel. It's free, doesn't cost you anything, but this way you'll get an alert when I go live for these hearings now and in the future. And we'll have a number of others coming up in July. Unless what happens today happens again, in which they just call a committee hearing with a moment's notice. Oh, somebody just brought up a good point. Requests for pardons are a consciousness of guilt. Requests for pardons are consciousness of guilt. Acceptance of a pardon is an admission of guilt. So if these people sought pardons, and again, we don't know who's accepted these pardons because we just don't know who's accepted them yet, if they were even given. You would assume that the people who are pleading the fifth don't have pardons, because pleading the fifth allows you to not speak so as to self-incriminate. And if you have a pardon, you're not able to incriminate yourself anyway. So anybody who is speaking to the committee likely doesn't. Will the DOJ even do anything about this? What are your thoughts? I have to think that the DOJ is seeking this stuff, because we've already heard them request information from people about Donald Trump. So clearly, they're circling this drain, and I think they've reached the point where they're trying to get to him. I also think that this January 6th committee hearing schedule is important to them too, because this ramps up the pressure on the DOJ, because everybody knows that the January 6th committee itself can't charge anybody, can't indict anybody, but the DOJ can. And so this investigation that would be happening just among the DOJ officials, like behind the scenes, is happening in public concurrently. And so whereas the DOJ would be able to operate with very little pressure, relatively speaking, because we wouldn't know what's happening, we wouldn't know all of these 1,000 people they've spoken with, we wouldn't have any insight into the tens of thousands of documents that the January 6th committee has had access to. Now, because of this committee, we do. And so all of this pressure that the DOJ wouldn't be under, because it would all have been done in private, basically, is happening in public. And so that allows people to push Merrick Garland, to push the DOJ to actually do something about what we all know is outright criminality, about Donald Trump's actions, which we know were done with criminal intent, because we know that he was told behind the scenes by people like Bill Barr, by people like Alex Cannon, by even his own daughter, Ivanka, admitted that there was no fraud. And yet somebody like Trump would go out and repeat these fraud claims anyway, because he knew what he was doing was A, had corrupt intent, and B, was just done with the sole purpose of defrauding the very people he was speaking with. So I have to think that the DOJ will do something about this. I mean, we can't go into this. I mean, look, we can't go into this with such a defeatist attitude. I think we all have some degree of a defeatist attitude, because we've lived through the Trump era, and it's very hard to see any accountability for these people clearly. But I think that, we have to hope that something's going to be done about everything that we're seeing. So until I'm proven otherwise, all I can do is hold out hope that the DOJ is going to see all of this, see the criminal intent that Trump operated with, see all the criminality that he and his foot soldiers operated with, and that they'll do something about it. In your opinion, what single video clip of the existing hearings is most damning for the conspirators? I think that the most damning video clip is from the first day, where we have someone like Bill Barr, who came out and said that he told Trump that his claims of fraud were bullshit. It was also someone like Hirschman, the White House counsel, speaking with Pence's team, and saying that they wouldn't be able to do this John Eastman scheme, and so the Pence team knew that, and when they spoke with somebody from the Trump side and told them that, Trump went out and said that Pence was able to do this anyway. So I think those two clips were especially damning. Anything with Hirschman, and anything with Hirschman speaking with Pence's team and Trump's team, and also Bill Barr just calling Trump's whole election fraud scheme bullshit. I think that's important, because it proves that Trump was told beforehand, like I just said, he was told beforehand the truth, and yet opted to ignore it, because his goal in all of this wasn't to actually let his supporters know that there was fraud, because there wasn't, and we know that there wasn't because he was just told it. It was to defraud them. And so not only did he defraud them, but he did it with corrupt intent, because he was already told the truth. He knew the truth. He was told the truth by Bill Barr. Bill Barr, by the way, who is no hero in all of this, but even if that guy, somebody who completely misrepresented the Mueller report, for example, came out and gave his summary about the Mueller report that bared no resemblance to the actual Mueller report, if someone like that, someone who is such a willing and able foot soldier for Donald Trump, would come forward and tell him that there was no, that all of his claims of fraud were bullshit, all of his claims of fraud were bullshit. Oh, so somebody had brought up Rudy getting attacked, getting brutally assaulted. I'm not sure if anybody's seen that clip of Rudy Giuliani getting brutally assaulted. It was frankly hard for me to watch someone at that age take a beating quite like he did. I'm kidding. What actually happened with Rudy Giuliani is somebody came by him, gave him a pat on the back, said something. We can't hear that part in the video, but I mean, it's a pat on the back. Rudy went on. I mean, the like the equivalent of like showing up the next day in a wheelchair and a neck brace. The guy took a pat on the back. You've taken harder hits if someone like accidentally bumped into you at the supermarket or online to pay for something. He walked out and he was doing interviews where he said that he was that it was excruciating pain, that he felt like he got hit by a boulder. I mean, somebody patted him on the back. And look, I'll never advocate for you. You can't touch another person. It's still probably assault. Just don't touch other people, especially if you don't like them. But for him to have claimed that he got struck by a boulder, I mean, it just goes to show like the extent to which these people traffic in bullshit. And he had the upper hand. All he had to say was like, someone touched me. I didn't want him to touch me. It probably qualifies as assault. The guy got arrested. Don't touch me. And he would have looked fine. But to go on this like pity tour on Newsmax and podcasts and wherever else he was, crying about how he felt like he got struck with the force of 10,000 buildings. My God, Rudy. Give it a rest. It's like his own personal 9/11 besides 9/11. I think that was actually the last short that I posted on my channel. So if you haven't seen that clip yet, just go to my channel and scroll down from the homepage on the shorts. It's the most recent short that I posted was like, it's like a 45-second clip of Rudy. And I've told this story before. Rudy was like, I grew up in New Jersey. My whole family is from New York. Rudy was like one of my heroes when I was growing up. I had a signed photo of Rudy Giuliani and Yankees manager Joe Torre on my wall. Like, for me to have a signed picture of Rudy Giuliani on my childhood bedroom wall goes to show the fall from grace this guy's had. The guy was one of my heroes. I wanted Giuliani to run for president so bad. I thought he was great. I mean, from a kid from Jersey whose whole family's from New York, and then like growing up living in Jersey after 9/11, to have like seen Rudy at his prime, just kind of highlights the dichotomy between what we're seeing right now and then. And it's sad. It's really sad what Rudy's become, coming from someone who thought he was like a hero back then. So for me to say that, somebody for whom he started at like the top, goes to show like what a fall he's taken. And it is sad, but that's what happens in the Republican Party. If you want to succeed, you have one option, and that's to have, sycophantic devotion to Donald Trump. And that's it. And if you don't, you're not going to get through a primary. You're not going to get the adulation that you so need from Fox News and Newsmax and OAN and like Dan Bongino. Those are the gatekeepers on the right now. That's right. I forgot that. He said he thought he'd been shot with a gun. Like, the guy got patted on the back. And again, he's in the right, because like you just can't touch somebody else. And if you do pat somebody in the back, no matter how hard it is, it's probably still assault. But like, to go out there with like the world's tiniest violin and whine about how you feel like you've been shot in the back with a gun. It's just wild. Let me see if I can show this clip. I'm not very good at this stuff, but let me see if I could figure out. Let me get this Giuliani clip. Okay, I think I've got this Giuliani
We've got an
clip.
election day tomorrow. In several states, including right here in New York, Republicans running in the primary for governor here, on the Republican side, is former Trump aide Andrew Giuliani, the son of former Trump lawyer Rudy Giuliani, who had his law license suspended for trying to steal the election. Giuliani also told the New York Times that he was left with, quote, red marks on his back, but was not bleeding. He told his Facebook audience the physical assault was extremely painful.
I got hit on the back.
Okay, so watch this first, then they'll show the assault.
It knocked me forward a step or two. It didn't knock me down, but it hurt tremendously.
Again, that was how Giuliani described it. And then the grocery store released the actual footage of the alleged assault. This is what it showed. There is Rudy standing right there in the middle with his back to us, looking away from the camera. Then out of nowhere, what? Whoa, wait, that's it? That's what felt like a boulder, a gunshot? Let's take another look in slow motion. Rudy standing there, he's talking, and then somebody slaps him on the back. The two men appear to exchange words, and that's it. That was the assault, as Rudy tells it.
That's it, folks. That's the whole thing, the whole assault. So, yeah. And look, again, for the umpteenth time, because I know that there's going to be people who's say otherwise. You just can't touch another person, and that's fine, and I think we all accept that. But for him to go on this media tour, again, is just kind of the peak of like, and also this is a party who wails on an endless loop about how like they're the alphas, about how they know what a real man is, and how Democrats can't even define what a woman is. And meanwhile, somebody taps this guy in the back, and he's like, a boulder's hit me. I've been shot with 4 AR-15s. Okay, let me get rid of this here. So that's the Rudy Giuliani saga. I'd have expected nothing less from Rudy Giuliani. I guess we just should be happy at least that his head wasn't melting now, that he's gotten that under control. So with that said, we've got less than 45 minutes until this hearing begins. Again, for those of you just joining in, today we'll hear from Cassidy Hutchinson. That is the aide to Mark Meadows. That's I believe one of the only witnesses, these surprise witnesses that are being brought forward today. Whatever information she has or she's willing to share with the January 6th committee is important enough that they scheduled this hearing with a moment's notice, and they said that today's hearing would, quote, present recently obtained evidence and we'd receive witness testimony. So whatever this new evidence is clearly important enough to bring this entire thing forward. Again, Cassidy Hutchinson was also involved with conversations about requests for pardons from Matt Gaetz, Mo Brooks, Andy Biggs, Louis Gohmert, and Scott Perry. So, if she's speaking to all of these people who themselves had a hand in all of this illegal activity to the point where they felt like it was a necessity to request pardons, she's clearly a central figure in all of this. Okay, I want to talk about some of the things that we've heard from previous hearings. So let me pull up my notes here. I also do want to take a moment to speak about Roe before we get into the January 6th committee hearings. we expected the Supreme Court to overturn Roe, and they've just done it this past Friday, which I fully expected on that Friday because they added an extra day that week, an extra decision day. It's also a Friday, so they get to, skirt out for the weekend. Somebody just asked if I could turn up the volume. So I fully expected that to happen this past Friday. Here's what I would say. I would say the first thing is, and I've spoken about this on my video, so I do apologize if you've heard this before, but I think the important thing here is to normalize the idea of expanding the court, because a lot of people try to, especially the right now that they have a 6-3 majority on the court, a 6-3 extremist majority on the court, they'll say, you can't touch the Supreme Court because it's apolitical. It's an apolitical institution, and the Supreme Court is sacrosanct, and it's above politics. The people who are sitting on the Supreme Court right now are not above politics. They are political operatives. I dare you to put Clarence Thomas up against any hack Republican in Congress, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, and tell me that Clarence Thomas is any less partisan or extreme than any of those people. Of course he's not. He is just as partisan, just as much of a political operative, along with Amy Coney Barrett, along with Neil Gorsuch, as any other member, as Samuel Alito, as any other member on the court. And so, I think we have to get this idea out of our head that we can't expand the court because that's extreme. That would be an extreme reaction to what we're seeing right now, when in reality, the extreme reaction is what's happening right in front of us. Democrats so often are like, well, we can't eliminate the filibuster because then imagine what can happen in the future. Imagine what Republicans might do if they have that power. But nothing is worse than what's happening right in front of us. What are Republicans going to do? Eliminate the right to abortions in the United States? They've already done it. What are Republicans going to do? Deny the impacts of climate change? They've already done it. What are Republicans going to do? Try to pass permitless carry and allow for guns everywhere for everybody 18 and up in the entire country, regardless of background or mental illness? They've already done it. All of the extreme things that we're so worried about Republicans doing, they've already done. So at this point, we can either take extreme action and confront them because they know we won't, so we do it and actually confront them and try to stop them in their tracks, or do nothing and allow these things that are extreme in and of themselves to continue to stand. So I think when we're so worried about expanding the court, because then we have Republicans who come out and say, oh, you want to expand the court now? Just wait until we take power. And give yourselves what? A majority that's going to do exactly what's happening right now? At least we'd have a fighting chance if we expanded the court and got more justices on so that we can, for example, pass the Women's Health Protection Act, codifying Roe. Because right now, I know, here's what needs to happen. We need to hold the House. We need to add 2 Democratic senators. Once we have 2 more Democratic senators, we can eliminate the filibuster, and that means we can pass legislation with a workable majority, a simple majority, 50 votes plus 1. We have that right now, but we have 2 senators who won't eliminate the filibuster. We have Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. And so if we have 2 more Democratic senators, we can pass this legislation. Great. But then we're confronted with the issue of the court. And if we pass a law codifying Roe, the Supreme Court won't allow it to stand. So the end of the story can't be just passing legislation. The end of the story can't just be getting 2 more senators, and then passing this legislation being like, we've done it, because we haven't. What needs to happen after that is that we actually expand the court so that so much of what we're able to pass with our newly governable majority is able to actually stand. Because don't doubt for a second that if we pass the Women's Health Protection Act and codify Roe into law, that this Supreme Court will not find a way to twist themselves into pretzels to strike down that law. They've already alluded to the fact that they believe that these I don't even want to call them fetuses, embryos, that unborn, what they're calling the unborn, which are not viable humans, but the unborn have personhood, are conferred with personhood. And so if they have personhood, they'll allow a national law banning abortion to stand. but they won't allow a federal law, they won't allow statute protecting a woman's right to an abortion to stand. So they will allow one. If Republicans take control and they pass a law banning abortion nationwide, which is the ultimate goal in all of this, that's what they'll do when they have a Democratic House, Senate, and President. They'll allow that to stand because they believe that the unborn have personhood. But if we have full majorities in the House, Senate, and the presidency, and we pass a law codifying Roe, codifying a right to a safe and legal abortion in the U.S., they will strike that down. So the answer here has to be that we normalize and push for expanding the court. This idea that we have to respect tradition. There is no tradition in all of this. There is no precedent in all of this because it's been undone by the right every chance they've gotten. That part is over. Even the number 9 on the Supreme Court is not sacrosanct. Mitch McConnell himself changed the makeup of the court from 8 to 9 while he was holding Merrick Garland's seat open for an entire year. So this isn't the first time, even within the last couple of years, that the number of justices on the Supreme Court has changed. By the way, it's not in the Constitution. It's not in statute. That number has changed in the past. It's gone up and down, and it's also been equal to the number of circuit courts. So in 1869, Congress set the number of Supreme Court justices to 9 to align with the fact that we had 9 circuit courts. There are now 13 circuit courts, which would suggest that the reasonable thing to do here is to elevate the number of Supreme Court justices to 13. And again, there are people that are going to be like, "Oh, that's radical. What the Democrats are doing is radical. They're undermining all of our institutions," which, by the way, is rich in and of itself because we are in the middle of January 6 hearings where the president of the United States incited a coup because he didn't want to accept the results of a free and fair election. So spare me on this idea that Democrats are undermining institutions. But regardless of that, we've seen this before in terms of the number of justices on the court changing. And again, this is not because Democrats have sought to just bend the will of the court to their favor. This is because this is in response to what the Republicans have already done, which is to undermine 50 years of precedent. And so I think that the only solution here is to wake up and start fighting for our side, because I think what the right has seen is that Democrats won't, and they fully expect them not to. And so they can go as far right as they can humanly go, knowing full well that they're going to get an impotent response from the left. So I think if we can undo them of this notion that Democrats won't fight back, it's going to prevent them from being so bold in kind of stripping us of all of our rights. So anyway, that's my spiel about the Supreme Court and the importance of not only expanding the court, but normalize this idea of expanding the court and recognizing that when they inevitably come forward and say that Democrats are being extreme by bringing up the idea of expanding the court, we point to the fact that what's extreme is what's happening right this very second. And there are 70% of Americans who agree with Roe. There's also 50 years of precedent in terms of agreeing with the foundations of Roe. Other Supreme Court justices, it's been upheld what Justice Kavanaugh himself called precedent upon precedent. So this is as close to super precedent as you can get. All of these decisions were built upon this idea that women have a right to a safe and legal abortion in this country. So there is no sanctity in what the Supreme Court is doing here. They're making it up as they go. They are political operatives. There's no listening to precedent or settled law, just like all of them said in their confirmation hearings, crowing about how they would respect precedent. They haven't. I think that's extreme. And the only way to rebalance what is a far-right extremist court is to add seats to this court. Somebody had asked, why no term limits in the House and Senate? Because the people who would have to implement those term limits are the people with that power. And if there's one thing that we've grown to learn, it's that people who have power very rarely want to give it up. And I think we've seen that in all too much detail over these last few months, years. Also, somebody had asked, does anyone doubt that Republicans would expand the court next time they're in control? I think that if Democrats did, I think Republicans would have no qualms about expanding the court. Republicans will always fight back, but I think what we shouldn't do is be afraid that they might fight back, and so kind of neuter ourselves right at the top. I think that would be the more dangerous thing. The people who say, well, we can't do it because then they'll turn around and do something even worse. That is, I think, the worst thing that we could do in terms of protecting ourselves and protecting our own rights, because it gives them carte blanche to take extreme actions, knowing that if there's enough people on the left who are too scared to reciprocate because of some untold thing that might happen at some untold point in the future, then it's just giving them carte blanche to do whatever they want to do, knowing that they could just scare us with murky threats in the future about what they may or may not do. So I think the Democrats have to realize, like, if Republicans are going to fight, we fight back harder, and we do so to protect something that's actually virtuous, which in this case is the right to a safe and legal abortion in the United States. 70% of Americans support Roe. 70% of Americans support Roe. Also, 50 years of Supreme Court precedent supports Roe. And so these people who are saying, well, these people are just reading the letter of the law, they're just umpires calling balls and strikes. They're not, because we already know that the Supreme Court, that these justices who are ostensibly at the same level as them, they're all Supreme Court justices, have already said that Roe is established precedent, established law, that it's good law, that it was correctly decided. So if you really believe in like the sanctity of the court, that doesn't just start with Kavanaugh, Alito, Clarence Thomas, Neil Gorsuch, and Amy Coney Barrett. There are already Supreme Court justices who held the same position as all of these justices, who said that it was good law, who said that this case was correctly decided. So if you're really if you're going to pretend that like the Supreme Court, that what they say is sacrosanct, that like, that you can't undermine what the Supreme Court has said, is that going to start today? Or have you had respect for the Supreme Court for as long as they've been saying that Roe is good law? Because if it's that, then again, you can't start with just what Clarence Thomas has said. Otherwise, you're just cherry picking for some ruling that you wanted. Okay, we have a half hour until this hearing begins. We have a half hour until this hearing begins. For anybody new just tuning in, if you've not yet subscribed to my channel, please throw me a subscribe. That is the best way to support me. I'll do these live streams for every hearing. This one came out of nowhere yesterday, but I'll continue to do these live streams for every January 6th committee hearing. I know we have several more coming up in July, so if you want to be alerted when we have these hearings in the future, next month, throw me a subscribe and watch along with me as we do these live streams for these hearings. I would say too, if you are, just like a quick aside, I'm not going to spend any time on this, but if you are looking to help the progressive ecosystem, it does help to subscribe and drive engagement to progressive channels. I think the reason that I started doing this on YouTube is because I would log on and all I would see was right-wing content. And I'm like, there is this huge vacuum of left-wing content. I think back when I started doing this, there was like, Pacman did a little bit of it, TYT did a little, Kyle Kalinske, and that's pretty much all I saw. But there were a ton of right-wingers. There were the Ben Shapiros and like just Tommy Lahren, I think, was on YouTube. But in any case, there was this huge vacuum where even I was getting served right-wing content. So now I think what we can do, we have so many more progressive outlets on the left. We have the ones that I just named. We have Crooked Media. We have Midas Touch. We have, of course, Pacman and Kalinske. We have Crystal Ball. So there are a lot of great people coming up on the left. I think it's important to drive engagement and drive subscribership. So even if you don't watch all of these channels, just by virtue of subscribing, it'll elevate the progressive channels and kind of help in our fight to reach more people against a conservative media ecosystem that does really well and that reaches a lot of people. Like I said, like when I first got onto YouTube, I was getting served all of that content. So Sam Cedar as well. Somebody just reminded me. So I think that's important, is like to support all of these progressive outlets and these progressive independent creators, because it'll help kind of as people continue to log on to YouTube and search for content and kind of create their political identity, is to continue to support those people. So that's just my spiel. Do you feel guilted yet into subscribing to my channel? That wasn't the goal. That wasn't the intention here. Yeah, some people are pointing out others. Jesse Dollamore, again, Midas Touch, Politics Girl, Vosh, Hassan, Majority Report. And it's great reading all these. Glenn Kirshner, my good friend Glenn Kirshner, who's awesome. That's Glenn. Beau of the Fifth Column. Pac-Man, of course. So yeah, Ring of Fire, Humanist Report, Rational National. So in any case, there are a lot of people coming up, and kind of, Roland Martin, good point. I'm gonna forget some, but the fact is that there are a lot. So support these people, because these people are all doing good work in terms of kind of prying people away from a right-wing media ecosystem that has been really effective, especially in terms of getting young people. I don't have TV, I don't have cable, so I get my news from the internet, and so when I go on and I'm served content from right-wing sources, that's me, somebody whose algorithm is probably doesn't lend itself to watching a lot of right-wing content. So if that's me, just imagine what people who don't have like a lot of this, they're an algorithm that pushes them toward left-wing content. Imagine what they're getting served. So anyway, do what you can to support progressive media. Mary Trump, Texas Paul, Ben Dixon. So there are a lot. In any case, I'm glad that people are bringing these up. Check out the comments, find a couple of those people, subscribe to their stuff, like some of their videos, and give them a watch. And let's fix the algorithms so they point toward progressive stuff just a little bit more. Give them a little bit more engagement. Show them some love. Help the next, innocent bystander who meanders onto YouTube from the great swing state of Pennsylvania, who may be watching a Ben Shapiro video, or maybe served another video because enough of you gave engagement to progressive media. This is just me heaping on the Jewish guilt right now. This is what it feels like. Now, congratulations, you know what it's like to have grown up in my house. Okay, for people just joining, again, people have been asking who is the witness today. It's going to be Cassidy Hutchinson. That is an aide to Trump's then Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows. She's become one of the most useful witnesses in terms of this committee so far. I believe she's spoken to this committee around 25 hours so far. She's especially important because Mark Meadows himself refused to appear. He was held in contempt. But Hutchinson, as one of his close aides who was always there, is able to kind of draw a picture of the scope of Meadows' actions in terms of his involvement in January 6th. This is from the Washington Post. Washington Post said that Brendan Buck, who had been an aide to Paul Ryan, said Hutchinson, quote, was always by Meadows' side. When there were meetings you'd expect principal level or very small senior staff level, he would always insist that she was in the room. So again, she's going to be not a high level aide, but we'll have we'll have the insight of one because she was always there. Like this guy said, like Brendan Buck said, it would be principal level or senior staff level, and yet she was always there. So even though she wasn't a senior staff member, she'll be important in terms of kind of explaining what happened anyway. He went on to say that it's just unusual to have relatively junior aide to be either in principal level or senior staff level, but it was his call, so we deferred to him. She was in every single meeting. That will prove important. And again, I mentioned this before, but she was involved in conversations about requests from Matt Gaetz, Mo Brooks, Andy Biggs, Louis Gohmert, and Scott Perry, all of whom sought pardons. So again, she was right in the middle of all of this stuff. And for all of these people seeking pardons, I think especially important because, like we mentioned before, it shows consciousness of guilt. Again, if they accept the pardons, that would be an admission of guilt, and that was a Supreme Court ruling too. That was the Supreme Court ruling until it's not. So we'll see what the Supreme Court does with that. Of course, we already have like Clarence Thomas, who indicated in a concurrent brief that he would revisit other decisions related to privacy. So decisions having to do with same-sex marriage and whatnot. So again, if that isn't a 5-alarm fire, I've had gay friends call me and ask outright, like people who aren't paying attention to politics, who don't pay attention to politics so closely, who ask, like, are we still able to be married? Or like, if we go into Alabama or Georgia or Mississippi, are we still married? So, I mean, this impacts real people. They don't know what's going on. I hope what happens is that people recognize like the 5-alarm fire that is this decision and the threats that are subsequent decisions, and they turn that into action, because right now the only way, the one way we win this, the only way we win this is if people turn out in November, especially in these swing states, deliver 2 more senators and hold the House. That's it. If we're able to hold the House, we can repass so much of this legislation, like the Women's Health Protection Act. And then if we have 2 more senators, we can eliminate the filibuster, because right now the filibuster says that we need 60. We need to overcome that 60 vote threshold, that 60 vote hurdle. When we eliminate the filibuster, it becomes 50 plus 1. So to be able to pass any of these protections and codify a bunch of these rights into law, and then expand the court so that we can have a court that would actually protect these rights instead of just doing the bidding of the far-right forces in the Republican Party, all of that has to happen. But it starts quite simply with just turning out to vote in November. I think that's going to be the most important thing. And the fact is that if the same amount of people who voted in 2020 turn out in 2022, we win. It's as simple as that. We won all these states. We won Pennsylvania. We won Wisconsin. That's 2 votes, right? That's 2 senators right there. Vote out Ron Johnson and vote out any replacement to Pat Toomey, who would be Dr. Oz. Right there, we would have Fetterman, and I'm not sure if Wisconsin's had its primary yet. I don't know if it's going to be Mandela Barnes. Actually, let me know in the comments if Wisconsin has had it in. Somebody had asked why hasn't Roe been codified already, and that is a good question. There wasn't a pro-choice majority in either house, in either party rather, prior to this. This is the first time that we have a fully pro-choice majority. The last time Democrats had any semblance of a majority in Congress, they had a bunch of conservative Democrats who weren't pro-choice, and so they couldn't codify it. I know that Obama, there's the clip going around of Obama saying that it would be his top priority to codify Roe into law, but Obama can't pass the legislation. He can advocate for it, and I believe he did, but in terms of getting these conservative Democrats who are pro-life, who have since been voted out of office, who are pro-life to support these things, they didn't. And he can't, there's a limit to what, he has his bully pulpit, but a president can't just make some of these pro-life senators support pro-choice legislation. So with that said, it should have been codified already. We've had large majorities. It should have been a priority. It wasn't. And that's it. So we work with with the hand that we're dealt right now. I can't speak to that. I can't speak to what happened in the past. I didn't even do what I'm doing now in the past, so it's hard for me to know exactly what's happened back then. But all I do know is that right now we have a very clear game plan in front of us in terms of how to protect a woman's right to a safe and legal abortion in the United States. And it's just this November turning out to vote so that we get 2 more Democratic senators, eliminate the filibuster, pass these laws, and expand the court. It's a lot to do, and a lot has to go right, but if we're focused, if people are engaged, if there's high turnout, we can do it. with that said, there's also some other creative ideas that I've seen pop up, and those include like opening abortion clinics on federal lands, at federal courthouses in these states that have abortion bans. I don't know if that's legal. There's creating abortion clinics on Native American land. Again, I don't know if that's legal. Of course, the FDA and the DOJ have just reaffirmed the abortion medication, and there's no way that states, right now, they've reaffirmed the fact that states can't undermine the ability for that medication to be sent out. So a lot of questions right now. Obviously, we're just in the heart of it. So we'll see what happens. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of litigation at both the state and federal level. Litigation that happens at the federal level worries me because, again, we have a Supreme Court that will twist itself into pretzels to, get the outcome that they want. So I'm trying to read your questions here. If Beto beats Abbott, could he reverse the new regulations in Texas? If there's such a favorable environment in Texas that Beto wins, that would probably mean that that the state house or state senate would be flipped as well. And so if they pass new legislation that would protect a woman's right to an abortion, then yeah, he could reverse that. If Beto won and he has Republican majorities, he can't create legislation. He would just be able to sign it into law. But again, if the environment is so favorable that Beto wins, depending on what their gerrymandered districts look like, they could put forward new legislation and Beto could sign it. How do we get them impeached? So Stacey had asked, how do we get them impeached? I'm less interested in the impeachment argument, not because I don't think it's the right thing to do, but if I'm not mistaken, we need 2/3 of Congress to support an impeachment. That won't happen in this environment, but I still don't think that's a reason not to do it. I think you do it because it's the right thing to do. But practically speaking, I think it would be more doable as opposed to getting 2/3 of Congress. It's just to hold the House, hold our simple majority in the House, and add 2 senators in the Senate. That's a lot easier to do because now we're dealing with, a simple majority in the House and having 52 Democratic senators in the Senate. And I think that's more doable than somehow convincing like a 2/3 majority to support impeachment. Otherwise, we'll see another impeachment. I think that will just help in terms of pushing people away from this whole idea and saying, oh, it's another impeachment trial. Democrats impeach everybody. The Wisconsin primary is August 9th, so we don't know yet who the Democratic nominee is for Wisconsin. But in any case, they're going up against Ron Johnson, who is overwhelmingly unpopular. So I think he's actually underwater in his approval ratings in Wisconsin. So we can win in Wisconsin, we can win in Pennsylvania. Both of those Senate candidates that are on the Republican side are unpopular. Both of those states went for Democrats in the 2020 election. So it's not, what we're trying to do is not insurmountable. It's just repeating what just happened in November of 2020. What can be done about the Electoral College? The states are ratifying something called the the National Popular Vote Compact, and that would say that whoever wins the national popular vote, that's who the state's electoral votes would go to. So it would basically be a way to just completely undermine the Electoral College. So basically, for example, let's say California has 55 electoral votes. Let's say it was Biden versus Trump, and let's say Trump won nationally. He got more votes. One person, one vote. He got more of the popular vote than Biden did. If California signed that compact and it goes into law, and it's ratified, then all of California's 55 electoral votes go to Trump, even if Trump didn't win the state of California. This is important because it basically says that whoever wins the national popular vote is going to get is going to win, because it basically just makes the electoral votes it makes them go away as a system. So that system wouldn't exist anymore if that was the case, which I think is the right thing to do in a democracy, that we don't have this the ability for an electoral college to give all of this disproportionate power to small states, but B, kind of opens the door for states to completely abuse this system, and that's what we're seeing right now with all of this stuff. Okay, let me get ready to put this hearing on, because we're about 10 minutes away. Okay. So again, we're about 10 minutes away from this committee hearing starting. See if we've got audio yet. We just have the light din of a committee hearing about to begin. So this will start in about 10 minutes. I'll use this time now to ask, before we go on, I'll answer some questions, but before you go on, if you can please subscribe to this channel so that you can get notifications for every time that I do these live streams for the January 6th committee, that would be helpful. It's free, doesn't cost you anything, but it would be the best way to support what I do. So if you're not yet subscribed, just hit the subscribe button. I would really appreciate that. And I promise I won't give you the whole spiel, the whole guilt trip on supporting progressive media and not letting the Ben Shapiros of the world win. Somebody had said we need a better way to track our ballot when we vote, some kind of barcode. A lot of states do have ballot tracking. I know California, a lot of states offer that, and I'm sure it'll get more popular as long as Democrats continue to get elected into office and our election systems become more secure by virtue of people who actually care about one's right to vote getting elected. We'll see more and more of that. Oh, somebody said, Fred asked, besides subscribe, what else can we do to support your work? Thank you for asking. Actually, the best way, the best way besides YouTube is I have a podcast called No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen. It's on every podcast platform. If you could subscribe to that podcast, that is another great way, also free. So I won't do anything where I ask for money, but I think just subscribing to the YouTube channel, and subscribing to my podcast would be super helpful. Again, the podcast is called No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen. If you just type in my name in YouTube, it'll in podcast platform like Apple Podcasts or Spotify, that'll pop up as well. And I always have interviews on there that are not on YouTube. So a lot of my podcast stuff I do put online, but but there's always at least one interview that doesn't go onto YouTube. This week's podcast talks about the Roe decision. It talks about court expansion. I speak to John Lovett, who is Obama's speechwriter. We have a really fun conversation. And I speak with Annette Taddeo, who's running in Florida's 27th congressional district. That is the most flippable congressional district in the entire state of Florida. So these are the people who have these races that aren't, it's on Pandora, yes, for somebody just asking. These are the races that aren't as sexy because they're not like, it's not like Mitch McConnell versus, Mitch McConnell's up, but these are the races that are so immensely important for us to win if we want any chance of actually holding on to the House, so that we can pass the Women's Health Protection Act, for example, in the next term. So, I'm going to be speaking with a lot of these frontline Democrats, the people that we really have to focus on in terms of supporting in this next election if we want any hope of holding on to the House. And for a lot of these people, our money goes way farther because these are small districts. Oftentimes they're 1 or 2 term Congress people. You might not have heard of them, but their seats are going to be so instrumental in terms of holding the House. So again, the first one that I spoke with as part of this series, so to speak, is Annette Taddeo in Florida's 27th. That's Miami. Super important district, not just because right now it's a Biden +1 district, but also because it's 75% Hispanic. And so I speak with her on the podcast about what Democrats can do to hang on to Hispanic, to claw back the Hispanic vote, and also what she's doing specifically that kind of positions herself to best win this race. I mean, not only is she Hispanic, but she's also won her state Senate seat in that specific district. So, and she flipped that from a red seat to a blue seat. So she's uniquely qualified to be able to flip this seat. But I'm going to be speaking to a lot more of these Democrats as we get closer to midterms and kind of doing what I can to raise their profile and to help them. Okay, for people just tuning in, we are 5 minutes out from this committee hearing beginning. Most of my time spent right now is just trying to hide the sex spam bots in the chat. Trying to make this a better experience for people listening in the chat right now or following along in the chat right now. Of course, if you want to donate, people that are looking to donate, I also have the Don't Be a Mitch Fund. You can type in www.don'tbeamitch.com. Those donations are split among a number of voter registration groups. So we've raised about $970,000 for voter registration. I specifically focused on voter registration and not candidates because candidates are going to be inherently problematic, especially before these primaries, because somebody might not want to support one person who's not progressive enough or somebody who's too progressive. So supporting the candidates prior to actually when they're actually chosen is going to be inherently problematic. I thought it'd be more important for the last year. I started this in June of 2021. It's June of 2022. For the last year to support voter registration groups. And these people have been working for the last year, knocking doors, getting people registered to vote. I thought that was the most important thing. I saw what Stacey Abrams did in Georgia. My goal has always been to replicate that. So I focused on a number of other states. That $970,000 has been split between voter registration groups in Florida, North Carolina, Ohio, Iowa, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Georgia, and I believe, in Wisconsin. So those are the states that are split between. I think there's 10 or 11 states in total. But if you want to donate to that, if you're looking for something to donate to, I would highly recommend that fund. It's called the Don't Be a Mitch Fund. You can type in don'tbeamitch.com. It'll bring you right to the Act Blue. And again, it's an Act Blue, so none of that money actually, I don't see any of it. It goes right to the organizations. I thought that's an important thing, is to make sure that when you're donating your money, that it's going directly to the organizations that need it, and that people aren't taking a cut of it for themselves. I was actually about to name that fund Whiny Little Mitch, but some of the organizations that I had included felt a little uneasy about how obvious that pun was, so I couldn't do Whiny Little Mitch. But I do have a shirt that says Whiny Little Mitch, and that's on my website. And if you buy shirts from my website about the Don't Be a Mitch Fund, all of that money, 100%, gets donated to the fund. I think I sold maybe $10,000 worth of merch last year. All of it was donated right to the fund. So we're about 2 minutes away. 2 minutes away for people just joining in. Again, today's witness is going to be Cassidy Hutchinson. She's an aide to Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows. She's not a senior aide, but she was always in the room for every single meeting. So even though she wasn't senior staff level, she has, the insight of any senior staff level member. Thank you to people just tuning in. We are moments away from this committee starting. And as soon as the committee members come in, I'll switch to a bigger screen so you'll be able to see everything. You'll be able to hear everything. Again, this is a surprise hearing that was just called yesterday. So whatever it is that they've got, like, promises to be pretty compelling stuff for them to call for this in this unannounced surprise hearing. They weren't supposed to have another hearing until July. Okay, we are 1 minute away from the hearing beginning. Let's go to a bigger screen here. Somebody said, quit your mitching. That is so good. Bud Moore. Bud, please give me permission to print that on a shirt. Quit your mitching is great. I have a few shirts. I have one that says whiny little Mitch. I had don't be a Mitch. I have bye Mitch and Mitch please. So if you want any of those shirts, they're on my website, briantylercohen.com/shop, and you can buy them there. Any Mitch apparel, any Mitch merch, all gets donated back to the voter registration fund. Okay. Mitch, don't kill my vibe. Oh, God. What a good one also. That's CB. Mitch, don't kill my vibe. I should have done like a group. I should have done like a group brainstorm before I started printing these shirts. Mitch slap. But I'll give you a free shirt. Just email me. Brian@briantylercohen.com. I feel like everybody can agree that Bud deserves it. Okay, we are moments away. The January 6th committee hearing is going to begin any second now. It is 10:01 Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, and here comes the January 6th committee. So this is going to start any second now. And again, for people just joining, thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it. And while they do this, my last appeal: if you're just joining, if you're not yet a subscriber on this channel, please throw me a subscribe. Best way to support me. I'll continue doing these live streams for the January 6th committee. But the best way to be alerted when I have them is to subscribe to my channel. So thank you in advance for subscribing. I really appreciate it. Doesn't just help me, it helps like progressive media. And I believe this is Cassidy Hutchinson. That's the witness. So I believe that's her. We'll get confirmation momentarily.
The Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol will be in order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare the committee in recess at any point. Pursuant to House Deposition Authority Regulation 10, the chair announces the committee's approval to release the deposition material presented during this hearing. Good afternoon. In our hearings over the previous weeks, the Select Committee has laid out the details of a multi-part pressure campaign driven by the former president aimed at overturning the results of the 2020 presidential election and blocking the transfer of power. We've shown that this effort was based on a lie that the election was stolen, tainted by widespread fraud, Donald Trump's big lie. In the weeks ahead, the committee will hold additional hearings about how Donald Trump summoned a mob of his supporters to Washington, spurred them to march on the Capitol, and failed to take meaningful action to quell the violence as it was unfolding on January 6th. However, in recent days, the Select Committee has obtained new information dealing with what was going on in the White House on January 6th and in the days prior. Specific detailed information about what the former president and his top aides were doing and saying in those critical hours. First-hand details of what transpired in the office of the White House Chief of Staff, just steps from the Oval Office as the threats of violence became clear, and indeed, violence ultimately descended on the Capitol in the attack on American democracy. It's important that the American people hear that information immediately. That's why, in consultation with the Vice Chair, I've recalled the committee for today's hearing. As you've seen and heard in our earlier hearings, the Select Committee has developed a massive body of evidence thanks to the many hundreds of witnesses who have voluntarily provided information relevant to our investigation. It hasn't always been easy to get that information because the same people who drove the former president's pressure campaign to overturn the election are now trying to cover up the truth about January 6th. But thanks to the courage of certain individuals, the truth won't be buried. The American people won't be left in the dark. Our witness today, Ms. Cassie Hutchinson, has embodied that courage. I won't get into a lot of detail about Ms. Hutchinson's testimony will show. I'll allow her words to speak for themselves, and I hope everyone at home will listen very closely. First, I'll recognize our distinguished Vice Chair, Ms. Cheney of Wyoming, for any opening statements she'd care to offer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. In our first 5 hearings, the committee has heard from a significant number of Republicans, including former Trump administration Justice Department officials, Trump campaign officials, several members of President Trump's White House staff, a prominent conservative judge, and several others. Today's witness, Ms. Cassidy Hutchinson, is another Republican and another former member of President Trump's White House staff. Certain of us in the House of Representatives recall that Ms. Hutchinson once worked for House Republican Whip Steve Scalise, but she is also a familiar face on Capitol Hill because she held a prominent role in the White House Legislative Affairs Office and later was the principal aide to President Trump's Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows. Ms. Hutchinson has spent considerable time up here on Capitol Hill representing the Trump administration, and we welcome her back. Up until now, our hearings have each been organized to address specific elements of President Trump's plan to overturn the 2020 election. Today, we are departing somewhat from that model because Ms. Hutchinson's testimony touches on several important and cross-cutting topics that are relevant to each of our future hearings. In her role working for the White House Chief of Staff, Ms. Hutchinson handled a vast number of sensitive issues. She worked in the West Wing, several steps down the hall from the Oval Office. Ms. Hutchinson spoke daily with members of Congress, with high-ranking officials in the administration, with senior White House staff, including Mr. Meadows, with White House counsel, lawyers, and with Mr. Tony Ornato, who served as the White House Deputy Chief of Staff. She also worked on a daily basis with members of the Secret Service who were posted in the White House. In short, Ms. Hutchinson was in a position to know a great deal about the happenings in the Trump White House. Ms. Hutchinson has already sat for 4 videotaped interviews with committee investigators, and we thank her very much for her cooperation and for her courage. We will cover certain, but not all, relevant topics within Ms. Hutchinson's knowledge today. Again, our future hearings will supply greater detail, putting the testimony today in a broader and more complete context. Today, you will hear Ms. Hutchinson relate certain firsthand observations of President Trump's conduct on January 6th. You will also hear new information regarding the actions and statements of Mr. Trump's senior advisors that day, including his Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, and his White House counsel. And we will begin to examine evidence bearing on what President Trump and members of the White House staff knew about the prospect for violence on January 6th, even before that violence began. To best communicate the information the committee has gathered, we will follow the practice of our recent hearings, playing videotape testimony from Ms. Hutchinson and others, and also posing questions to Ms. Hutchinson live. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Our witness today is Ms. Cassie Hutchinson, who served in the Trump administration in the White House Office of Legislative Affairs from 2019 to 2020, and as a special assistant to the President in the White House Chief of Staff's office from March 2020 through January 2021. I will now swear in our witness. The witness will please stand and raise her right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. You may be seated. Let the record reflect the witness answered in the affirmative. I now recognize myself for questions. Ms. Hutchinson, I'd like to start with a few questions about your background. These are some photographs we've obtained highlighting your career. These show you with members of Congress, including Steve Scalise, as well as the White House with leader Kevin McCarthy and Jim Jordan. Others show you with the President and members of Congress aboard Air Force One. Before you worked in the White House, you worked on Capitol Hill for Representative Steve Scalise, the Republican whip, and Senator Ted Cruz. And then in 2019, you moved to the White House and served there until the end of the Trump administration in 2020.
This is for anybody who calls her like a liberal
Started at the
plant.
White House, you served in the Office of Legislative Affairs. We understand that you were initially hired as a staff assistant, but were soon promoted to a position of greater responsibility. Can you explain your role for the committee?
When I moved over to the White House Chief of Staff's office with Mr. Meadows when he became the 4th Chief of Staff, it's difficult to describe a typical day. I was a special assistant to the President and an advisor to the Chief of Staff. The days depended on what the President was doing that day, and that's kind of how my portfolio was reflected. I had a lot of outreach with members of Congress, senior cabinet officials. I would work on policy issues with relevant internal components and members on the Hill, as well as security protocol at the White House complex for Mr. Meadows and the President.
And then you received another promotion in March 2020. At that time, you became the principal aide to the new White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows. Is that right?
That's correct, sir.
What did a typical day look like for you in your work with Mr. Meadows?
It varied with what was going on. We spent a lot of time on the Hill. I spent time on the Hill independently too, as I was his liaison for Capitol Hill. We did a lot of presidential travel engagements, but mostly I was there to serve what the Chief of Staff needed, and a lot of times what the Chief of Staff needed was a reflection of what the President's schedule is detailed to do that day.
So is it fair to say that you spoke regularly in your position, both with members of Congress and with senior members of the Trump administration?
That's correct. That's a fair assessment, sir.
And would you say that in your work with Mr. Meadows, you are typically in contact with him and others in the White House throughout the day?
That's correct, sir. Mr. Meadows and I were in contact almost pretty much throughout every day, consistently.
Although so much of grave importance happens in the West Wing of the White House, it's quite a small building. Above me on the screen, you can see a map of the first floor of the West Wing of the White House. On the right, you can see the President's Oval Office. On the left, the Chief of Staff's office suite. Within the Chief of Staff's office suite is the heart of the West Wing, was your desk, which was between the Vice President's office, Ms. Kirshner's office, and the Oval Office. Ms. Hutchinson, is this an accurate depiction of where you were located?
It's accurate. It's a lot smaller than it looks.
Absolutely. Ms. Hutchinson, this is a photo that shows the short distance between your office and the President's Oval Office. And it only takes 5 to 10 seconds or so to walk down the hall from your office to the Oval Office. Is that right?
That's correct.
Thank you. Pursuant to the Section 5C8 of House Resolution 503, the chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney, for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we will begin today with an exchange that first provided Ms. Hutchinson a tangible sense of the ongoing planning for the events of January 6th. On January 2nd, 4 days before the attack on our Capitol, President Trump's lead lawyer, Mr. Giuliani, was meeting with White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows and others. Ms. Hutchinson, do you remember Mr. Giuliani meeting with Mr. Meadows on January 2nd, 2021?
I do. He met with Mr. Meadows in the evening of January 2nd, 2021.
And we understand that you walked Mr. Giuliani out of the White House that night, and he talked to you about January 6th. What do you remember him saying?
As Mr. Giuliani and I were walking to his vehicles that evening, he looked at me and said something to the effect of, "Cass, are you excited for the 6th? It's going to be a great day." I remember looking at him and saying, "Rudy, could you explain what's happening on the 6th? He had responded something to the effect of, "We're going to the Capitol. It's going to be great. The president's going to be there. He's going to look powerful. He's going to be with the members. He's going to be with the senators. Talk to the chief about it. Talk to the chief about it. He knows about it."
And did you go back then up to the West Wing and tell Mr. Meadows about your conversation with Mr. Giuliani?
I did. After Mr. Giuliani had left the campus that evening, I went back up to our office, and I found Mr. Meadows in his office on the couch. He was scrolling through his phone. I remember leaning against the doorway and saying, "I just had an interesting conversation with Rudy, Mark. Sounds like we're going to go to the Capitol." He didn't look up from his phone and said something to the effect of, "There's a lot going on, Cass, but I don't know. Things might get real, real bad on January 6th.
Ms. Hutchinson, Mr. Meadows is engaged in litigation with the committee to try to avoid testifying here. What was your reaction when he said to you things might get real, real bad?
In the days before January 2nd, I was apprehensive about the 6th. I had heard general plans for a rally. I had heard tentative movements to potentially go to the Capitol. But when hearing Rudy's take on January 6th and then Mark's response, that evening was the first moment that I remember feeling scared and nervous for what could happen on January 6th. And I had a deeper concern for what was happening with the planning aspects of it.
Thank you, Ms. Hutchinson. Today, we're going to be focusing primarily on the events of January 5th and 6th at the White House. But to begin and to frame the discussion, I want to talk about a conversation that you had with Mr. John Ratcliffe, the Director of National Intelligence, and you had this conversation in December of 2020. Mr. Ratcliffe was nominated by President Trump to oversee U.S. intelligence, our U.S. intelligence community, and before his appointment, Mr. Ratcliffe was a Republican member of Congress. As you will see on this clip, Director Ratcliffe's comments in December of 2020 were prescient.
My understanding was Director Ratcliffe didn't want much to do with the post-election period. Director Ratcliffe felt that it wasn't something that the White House should be pursuing. It felt it was dangerous for the president's legacy. He had expressed to me that he was concerned that it could spiral out of control and potentially be dangerous, either for our democracy or with the way that things were going for the six.
When you say it wasn't something the White House should be pursuing, what's the it?
Trying to fight the results of the election, finding missing ballots, pressuring filing lawsuits in certain states where there didn't seem to be significant evidence, and reaching out to state legislatures about that. So pretty much the way that the White House is handling the post-election period, he felt that there could be dangerous repercussions in terms of precedent set for elections, for our democracy, for the six. He was hoping that we would concede.
So, Ms. Hutchinson, now we're going to turn to certain information that was available before January 4th and what the Trump administration and the president knew about the potential for violence before January 6th. On the screen, you will see an email received by Acting Deputy Attorney General Donahue on January 4th from the National Security Division of the Department of Justice. Mr. Donahue testified in our hearings last week. The email identifies apparent planning by those coming to Washington on January 6th to, quote, occupy federal buildings, and discussions of, quote, invading the Capitol building. Here's what Mr. Donahue said to us.
And we knew that if you have tens of thousands of very upset people showing up in Washington, D.C., that there was potential for violence.
The U.S. Secret Service was looking at similar information and watching the planned demonstrations. In fact, their intelligence division sent several emails to White House personnel, like Deputy Chief of Staff Tony Ornato and the head of the President's Protective Detail, Robert Engel, including certain materials listing events like those on the screen. The White House continued to receive updates about planned demonstrations, including information regarding the Proud Boys organizing and planning to attend events on January 6th. Although Ms. Hutchinson has no detailed knowledge of any planning involving the Proud Boys for January 6th, she did note this.
I recall hearing the word Oath Keeper and hearing the word Proud Boys closer to the planning of the January 6th rally when Mr. Giuliani would be around.
On January 3rd, the Capitol Police issued a special event assessment. In that document, the Capitol Police noted that the Proud Boys and other groups planned to be in Washington, D.C. on January 6th and indicated that, quote, unlike previous post-election protests, the targets of the pro-Trump supporters are not necessarily the counter-protesters as they were previously, but rather Congress itself is the target on the 6th. Of course, we all know now that the Proud Boys showed up on January 6th, marched from the Washington Monument to the Capitol that day, and led the riotous mob to invade and occupy our Capitol. Ms. Hutchinson, I want to play you a clip of one of our meetings when you described a call on January 4th that you received from National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien on the same topic, potential violence on January 6th?
I received a call from Robert O'Brien, the National Security Advisor. He had asked if he could speak with Mr. Meadows about potential words of violence that he was hearing that were potentially going to happen on the Hill on January 6th. I had asked if he had connected with Tony Ornato because Tony Ornato had a conversation with Mark about that topic. Robert had said, I'll talk to Tony, and then I don't know if Robert ever connected with Mark about the issue.
Ms. Hutchinson, can you describe for us Mr. Ornato's responsibilities as Deputy Chief of Staff?
The Deputy Chief of Staff position at the White House for operations is arguably one of the most important positions that somebody can hold. They're in charge of all security protocol for the campus and all presidential protectees, primarily the president and the first family, but anything that requires security for any individual that has presidential protection, so the Chief of Staff or the National Security Advisor, as well as the Vice President's team too. Tony would oversee all of that, and he was the conduit for security protocol between White House staff and the United States Secret Service.
Thank you. And you also described a brief meeting between Mr. Ornato and Mr. Meadows on the potential for violence. The meeting was on January 4th. They were talking about the potential for violence on January 6th. Let's listen to a clip of that testimony.
I remember Mr. Ornato had talked to him about intelligence reports. I just remember Mr. Ornato coming in and saying that we had intel reports saying that there could potentially be violence on the 6th.
You also told us about reports of violence and weapons that the Secret Service were receiving on the night of January 5th and throughout the day on January 6th. Is that correct?
That's correct.
There are reports that police in Washington, D.C. had arrested several people with firearms or ammunition following a separate pro-Trump rally in Freedom Plaza on the evening of January 5th. Are those some of the reports that you recall hearing about?
They are.
Of course, the world now knows that the people who attacked the Capitol on January 6th had many different types of weapons. When a president speaks, the Secret Service typically requires those attending to pass through metal detectors, known as magnetometers, or MAGs for short. The Select Committee has learned that people who willingly entered the enclosed area for President Trump's speech were screened so they could attend the rally at the Ellipse. They had weapons and other items that were confiscated: pepper spray, knives, brass knuckles, tasers, body armor, gas masks, batons, blunt weapons. And those were just from the people who chose to go through the security for the president's event on the Ellipse, not the several thousand members of the crowd who refused to go through the MAGs and watched from the lawn near the Washington Monument. The Select Committee has learned about reports from outside the magnetometers and has obtained police radio transmissions identifying individuals with firearms, including AR-15s, near the Ellipse on the morning of January 6th. Let's listen.
There's an individual who's in a tree. He's going to be a white male, about 6 feet tall, thin build, brown cowboy boots. He's got blue jeans and a blue jean jacket, and underneath the blue jean jacket, the complainant's both saw stock with AR-15. He's going to be with a group of individuals, about five to eight other individuals. Two of the individuals in that group at the base of the tree, near the porta potties, were wearing green fatigues, green olive drab style fatigues, about 5'8", 5'9", skinny white males, brown cowboy boots. They had Glock-style pistols in their waistband.
8736 with the message. That subject, weapon on his right hip. After that, he's in the tree.
Motor 1, make sure PPD knows they have an elevated threat in the tree south side of Constitution Avenue. Look for the Don't Tread on Me flag, American flag face mask, cowboy boots, weapon on the right side hip.
I got 3 men walking down the street in fatigue while carrying AR-15. Copy at 14th and Independent.
Wow.
AR-15s at 14th and Independence. As you saw in those emails, the first report that we showed, we now know was sent in the 8 o'clock hour on January 6th. This talked about people in the crowd wearing ballistic helmets and body armor, carrying radio equipment and military-grade backpacks. The second report we showed you on the screen was sent by the Secret Service in the 11 a.m. hour, and it addressed reports of a man with a rifle near the ellipse. Ms. Hutchinson, in prior testimony, you described for us a meeting in the White House around 10 a.m. in the morning of January 6th, involving Chief of Staff Meadows and Tony Ornato. Were you in that meeting?
I was.
Let's listen to your testimony about that meeting, and then we'll have some questions.
I think the last time we talked, you mentioned that some of the weapons that people had at the rally included flagpoles, oversized sticks or flagpoles, bear spray. Is there anything else that you recall hearing about that the people who would gather on the ellipse had?
I recall Tony and I having a conversation with Mark probably around 10 a.m., 10:15 a.m., where I remember Tony mentioning knives, guns in the form of pistols and rifles, bear spray, body armor, spears, and flagpoles. Spears were one item, flagpoles were one item, and then Tony had relayed to me something to the effect of, and these effing people are fastening spears onto the ends of flagpoles.
Ms. Hutchinson, here's a clip of your testimony regarding Mr. Meadows' response to learning that the rally attendees were armed that day. What was Mark's reaction, Mr. Meadows' reaction to this list of weapons that people had in the crowd?
When Tony and I went in to talk to Mark that morning, Mark was sitting on his couch and on his phone, which was something typical. And I remember Tony just got right into it. I was like, sorry, I just want to let you know, and had informed him, like, this is how many people we have outside the mags right now. These are the weapons that we're known to have. It's possible he listed more weapons off that I just don't recall. And gave him a brief but and concise explanation, but also fairly thorough. And I remember distinctly Mark not looking up from his phone. And I remember Tony finishing his explanation and it taking a few seconds for Mark to say something, to the point where I almost said, Mark, did you hear him? And then Mark chimed in and was like, all right, anything else? Still looking down at his phone. And Tony looked at me and I looked at Tony, and Tony said, no, sir, do you have any questions? He's like, what are you hearing? And I looked at Tony and I was like, sir, he just told you about what was happening down at the rallies. And he was like, yeah, I know. And then he looked up and said, have you talked to the president? And Tony said, yes, sir, he's aware too. And he said, all right, good.
He asked Tony if Tony had informed the president.
Yes.
And Tony said, yes, he had. So, Ms. Hutchinson, is it your understanding that Mr. Ornato told the president about weapons at the rally on the morning of January 6th?
That's what Mr. Ornato relayed to me.
And here's how you characterize Mr. Meadows' general response when people raised concerns about what could happen on January 6th.
So at the time, in the days leading up to the 6th, there were lots of public reports about how things might go bad on the 6th, and even the potential for violence. If I'm hearing you correctly, what stands out to you is that Mr. Meadows did not share those concerns, or at least did not act on those concerns?
Did not act on those concerns would be accurate.
But other people raised them to him? Like in this exchange, you mentioned that Mr. Ornato pulled him aside.
That's correct.
Ms. Hutchinson, we're going to show now an exchange of texts between you and Deputy Chief of Staff Ornato. And these text messages were exchanged while you were at the ellipse. In one text, you write, but the crowd looks good from this vantage point as long as we get the shot. He was effing furious. And the text messages also stress that President Trump kept mentioning the OTR, an off-the-record movement. We're going to come back and ask you about that in a minute. But could you tell us, first of all, who it is in the text who was furious?
The he in that text that I was referring to was the president.
And why was he furious, Ms. Hutchinson?
He was furious because he wanted the arena that we had on the ellipse to be maxed out at capacity for all attendees. The advance team had relayed to him that the mags were free-flowing. Everybody who wanted to come in had already come in, but he still was angry about the extra space and wanted more people to come in.
And did you go to the rally in the presidential motorcade?
I was there, yes, in the motorcade.
And were you backstage with the president and other members of his staff and family?
I was.
And you told us, Ms. Hutchinson, about particular comments that you heard while you were in the tent area.
When we were in the offstage announce area tent behind the stage, he was very concerned about the shot, meaning the photograph that we would get, because the rally space wasn't full. One of the reasons, which I previously stated, was because he wanted it to be full and for people to not feel excluded because they'd come far to watch him at the rally. And he felt the mags were at fault for not letting everybody in. But another leading reason, and likely the primary reason, is because he wanted it full and he was angry that we weren't letting people through the mags with weapons, what the Secret Service deems as weapons and our weapons.
My God.
But when we were in the offstage announce tent, I was part of a conversation. I was in the vicinity of a conversation where I overheard the president say something to the effect of, I don't effing care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Take the effing mags away. Let my people in. They can march to the Capitol from here. Let the people in. Take the effing mags away.
Just to be clear, Ms. Hutchinson, is it your understanding that the president wanted to take the mags away and said that the armed individuals were not there to hurt him?
That's a fair assessment.
The issue wasn't with the amount of space available in the official rally area only, but instead that people did not want to have to go through the mags. Let's listen to a portion of what you told us about that.
In this particular instance, it wasn't the capacity of our space, it was the mags and the people that didn't want to come through, and that's what Tony had been trying to relay to him that morning. It's not the issues that we encountered on the campaign. We have enough space, or they don't want to come in right now. They have weapons that they don't want confiscated by the Secret Service, and they're fine on the mall. They can see you on the mall, and they want to march straight to the Capitol from the mall.
The president apparently wanted all attendees inside the official rally space and repeatedly said, quote, "They're not here to hurt me." And just to be clear, so he was told again in that conversation, or was he told again in that conversation, that people couldn't come through the mags because they had weapons?
Correct.
And that people, and his response was to say they can march to the Capitol from the ellipse.
Something to the effect of, take the effing mags away. They're not here to hurt me. Let them in. Let my people in. They can march to the Capitol after the rally's over. They can march from the ellipse. Take the effing mags away. Then they can march to the Capitol.
Ms. Hutchinson, what we saw when those clips were playing were photos provided by the National Archives showing the president in the offstage tent before his speech on the ellipse. You were in some of those photos as well. And I just want to confirm that that is when you heard the president say the people with weapons weren't there to hurt him and that he wanted the Secret Service to remove the magnetometers.
That's correct. In the photos that you displayed, we were standing towards the front of the tent with the TVs, really close to where he would walk out to go onto the stage. These conversations happened 2 to 3 minutes before he took the stage that morning.
Let's reflect on that for a moment. President Trump was aware that a number of the individuals in the crowd had weapons and were wearing body armor. And here's what President Trump instructed the crowd to do.
We're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down. We're going to walk down anyone you want, but I think right here we're going to walk down to the Capitol.
And the crowd, as we know, did proceed to the Capitol. It soon became apparent to the Secret Service, including the Secret Service teams in the crowd, along with White House staff, that security at the Capitol would not be sufficient.
I'd had 2 or 3 phone conversations with Mr. Ornato when we were at the Ellipse, and then I had 4 men on Mr. Meadows' detail with me in between those individuals and then a few other bodies on the ground, just the Secret Service doing advance. They were getting notifications through their radios, and Mr. Ornato in one phone conversation had called me and said, make sure the chief knows that they're getting closer to the Capitol. It's they're having trouble stacking bodies.
And Ms. Hutchinson, when you said they were having trouble stacking bodies, did you mean that law enforcement at the Capitol needed more people to defend the Capitol from the rioters?
It was becoming clear to us and to the Secret Service that Capitol police officers were getting overrun at the security barricades outside of the Capitol building, and they were short people to defend the building against the rioters.
And you mentioned that Mr. Ornato was conveying this to you because he wanted you to tell Mr. Meadows. So did you tell Mr. Meadows that people were getting closer to the Capitol and that Capitol Police was having difficulty?
After I had the conversation with Mr. Meadows, after I had the conversation with Mr. Ornato, I went to have the discussion with Mr. Meadows. He was in a secure vehicle at the time making a call. So when I had gone over to the car, I went to open the door to let him know, and he had immediately shut it. I don't know who he was speaking with. It wasn't something that he regularly did, especially when I would go over to give him information. So I was a bit taken aback, but I didn't think much of it, and thinking that I would be able to have the conversation with him a few moments later.
And were you able to have that conversation a few moments later?
Probably about 20 to 25 minutes later. There was another period in between where he shut the door again, and then when he finally got out of the vehicle, we had the conversation. But at that point, there was a backlog of information that he should have been made aware of.
And so you opened the door to the control car, and Mr. Meadows pulled it shut?
That's correct.
And he did that 2 times?
That's correct.
And when you finally were able to give Mr. Meadows the information about the violence at the Capitol, what was his reaction?
He almost had a lack of reaction. I remember him saying, all right, something to the effect of, how much longer does the president have left in his speech?
Again, much of this information about the potential for violence was known or learned before the onset of the violence, early enough for President Trump to take steps to prevent it. He could, for example, have urged the crowd at the Ellipse not to march to the Capitol. He could have condemned the violence immediately once it began, or he could have taken multiple other steps. But as we will see today and in later hearings, President Trump had something else in mind. One other question at this point, Ms. Hutchinson, were you aware of concerns that White House counsel Pat Cipollone or Eric Hirschman had about the language President Trump used in his Ellipse speech?
There were many discussions the morning of the 6th about the rhetoric of the speech that day. In my conversations with Mr. Hirschman, he had relayed that we would be foolish to include language that had been included at the president's request, which had lines along to the effect of, fight for Trump, we're going to march to the Capitol, I'll be there with you, fight for me, fight for what we're doing, fight for the movement. Things about the vice president at the time, too. Both Mr. Hirschman and White House counsel's office were urging the speechwriters to not include that language for legal concerns and also for the optics of what it could portray the president wanting to do that day.
And we just heard the president say that he would be with his supporters as they marched to the Capitol. Even though he did not end up going, he certainly wanted to. Some have questioned whether President Trump genuinely planned to to come here to the Capitol on January 6th. In his book, Mark Meadows falsely wrote that after President Trump gave his speech on January 6th, he told Mr. Meadows that he was, quote, speaking metaphorically about the walk to the Capitol. As you will see, Donald Trump was not speaking metaphorically. As we heard earlier, Rudy Giuliani told Ms. Hutchinson that Mr. Trump planned to travel to the Capitol on January 6th. I want to pause for just a moment to ask you, Ms. Hutchinson, to explain some of the terminology you will hear today. We've heard you use two different terms to describe plans for the president's movement to the Capitol or anywhere else. One of those is a scheduled movement, and another one is OTR. Could you describe for us what each of those mean?
A scheduled presidential movement is on his official schedule. It's notified to the press and to a wide range of staff that will be traveling with him. It's known to the public, known to the Secret Service, and they're able to coordinate the movement days in advance. An off-the-record movement is confined to the knowledge of a very, very small group of advisors and staff. Typically, a very small group of staff would travel with him, mostly that are just included in the national security package. You can pull an off-the-record movement together in less than an hour. It's a way to kind of circumvent having to release it to the press, if that's the goal of it, or to not have to have as many security parameters put in place ahead of time to make the movement happen.
Thank you. And let's turn back now to the president's plans to travel to the Capitol on January 6th. We know that White House counsel Pat Cipollone was concerned about the legal implications of such a trip, and he agreed with the Secret Service that it shouldn't happen. Ms. Hutchinson, did you have any conversations with Pat Cipollone about his concerns about the president going to the Capitol on January 6th?
On January 3rd, Mr. Cipollone had approached me, knowing that Mark had raised the prospect of going up to the Capitol on January 6th. Mr. Cipollone and I had a brief private conversation where he said to me, we need to make sure that this doesn't happen. This would be legally a terrible idea for us. We have serious legal concerns if we go up to the Capitol that day. And he then urged me to continue relaying that to Mr. Meadows, because it's my understanding that Mr. Cipollone thought that Mr. Meadows was indeed pushing this along with the president.
And we understand, Ms. Hutchinson, that you also spoke to Mr. Cipollone on the morning of the 6th as you were about to go to the rally on the Ellipse. And Mr. Cipollone said something to you like, make sure the movement to the Capitol does not happen. Is that correct?
That's correct. I saw Mr. Cipollone right before I walked out onto West Exec that morning, and Mr. Cipollone said something to the effect of, please make sure we don't go up to the Capitol, Cassidy. Keep in touch with me. We're going to get charged with every crime imaginable if we make that movement happen.
And do you remember which crimes Mr. Cipollone was concerned with?
In the days leading up to the 6th, we had conversations about potentially obstructing justice or defrauding the electoral count.
Let's hear about some of those concerns that you mentioned earlier in one of your interviews with us.
Having a private conversation with Pat late in the afternoon of the 3rd or the 4th, that Pat was concerned it would look like we were obstructing justice or obstructing the electoral college count. And I apologize for probably not being very firm with my legal terms here, but that it would look like we were obstructing what was happening on Capitol Hill. And he was also worried that it would look like we were inciting a riot or encouraging a riot to erupt on the Capitol, at the Capitol.
In fact, in the days before January 6th and on January 6th itself, President Trump expressed to multiple White House aides that he wanted to go to the Capitol after his speech. Here's what various White House aides have told the committee about the president's desire to go to the Capitol.
Did the president tell you this, that he wanted to speak at the Capitol?
Correct, yes. during the meeting in the dining room, did the idea of the president proceeding or walking to the Capitol on the 6th after his speech come up?
Walking to the Capitol? No.
Driving to the Capitol?
It came up.
Okay, how did it come up and what was discussed?
He brought it up. He said, I want to go down to the Capitol.
What about him marching to the Capitol on the 6th?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So it's kind of a general thing. I mean, to get into the specifics of it, I was aware of a desire of the president to potentially march to the or accompany the rally attendees to the Capitol.
When did you first hear about this idea of the president accompanying rally attendees to the Capitol on the 6th?
Well, this was at the 6th. This was during the after he finished his remarks.
When the president said that he would be going to the Capitol during his speech on the ellipse, the Secret Service scrambled to find a way for him to go. We know this from witnesses and the Secret Service, also from messages among staff on the President's National Security Council. The NSC staff were monitoring the situation in real time, and you can see how the situation evolved in the following chat log that the committee has obtained. As you can see, NSC staff believed that Mogul, the president, was, quote, going to the Capitol, and, quote, they are finding the best route now. From these chats, we also know the staff learned of the attack on the Capitol in real time. When President Trump left the ellipse stage at 1:10, the staff knew that rioters had invaded the inaugural stage and Capitol Police were calling for all available officers to respond. When Republican leader Kevin McCarthy heard the president say he was going to the Capitol, he called you, Ms. Hutchinson. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
And in this text message, you told Tony Ornato, quote, McCarthy just called me too. And do you guys think you're coming to my office? Tell us about the call that day with Leader McCarthy during the president's speech on the ellipse.
I was still in the tent behind the stage, and when you're behind the stage, you can't really hear what's going on in front of you. So when Mr. McCarthy called me with this information, I answered the call and he sounded rushed, but also frustrated and angry at me, and I was confused because I didn't know what the president had just said. He then explained, the president just said he's marching to the Capitol. You told me this whole week you aren't coming up here. Why would you lie to me? I said, I'm not lying. I wasn't lying to you, sir. We're not going to the Capitol. And he said, well, he just said it on stage, Cassidy. Figure it out. Don't come up here. I said, I'll run the traps on this and I'll shoot you a text. I can assure you we're not coming up to the Capitol. We've already made that decision. He pressed a little bit more, believing me, but I think frustrated that the president had said that. And we ended the phone conversation after that. I called Mr. Ornato to reconfirm that we weren't going to the Capitol, and which was also in our text messages. I sent Mr. McCarthy another text telling him the affirmative that we were not going up to the Capitol, and he didn't respond after that.
And we understand, Ms. Hutchinson, that the plans for the president to come up to the Capitol had included discussions at some point about what the president would do when he came up to the Capitol on January 6th. Let's look at a clip of one of your interviews discussing that issue with the committee.
When you were talking about a scheduled movement, did anyone say what the president wanted to do when he got here?
No. Not that I can specifically remember. I remember hearing a few different ideas discussed between Mark and Scott Perry, Mark and Rudy Giuliani. I don't know which conversations were elevated to the president. I don't know what he personally wanted to do when he went up to the Capitol that day. I know that there were discussions about him having another speech outside of the Capitol before going in. I know that there was a conversation about him going into the House chamber at one point.
As we've all just heard, in the days leading up to January 6th, on the day of the speech, both before and during and after the rally speech, President Trump was pushing his staff to arrange for him to come up here to the Capitol during the electoral vote count. Let's turn now to what happened in the president's vehicle when the Secret Service told him he would not be going to the Capitol after his speech. First, here is the president's motorcade leaving the ellipse after his speech on January 6th. Ms. Hutchinson, when you returned to the White House in the motorcade after the president's speech, where did you go?
When I returned to the White House, I walked upstairs towards the Chief of Staff's office, and I noticed Mr. Ornato lingering outside of the office. Once we had made eye contact, he quickly waved me to go into his office, which was just across the hall from mine. When I went in, he shut the door, and I noticed Bobby Engel, who is the head of Mr. Trump's security detail, sitting in a chair, just looking somewhat discombobulated and a little lost. I looked at Tony, and he had said, "Did you effing hear what happened in the Beast?" I said, "No, Tony, I just got back. What happened?" Tony proceeded to tell me that when the president got in the Beast, he was under the impression from Mr. Meadows that the off-the-record movement to the Capitol was still possible and likely to happen, but that Bobby had more information. So once the president had gotten into the vehicle with Bobby, he thought that they were going up to the Capitol, and when Bobby had relayed to him, "We're not, we don't have the assets to do it, it's not secure, we're going back to the West Wing," the president had a very angry response to that. Tony described him as being irate. The president said something to the effect of, "I'm the effing president, take me up to the Capitol now." To which Bobby responded, "Sir, we have to go back to the West Wing." The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel. Mr. Engel grabbed his arm, said, "Sir, you need to take your hand off the steering wheel. We're going back to the West Wing. We're not going to the Capitol." Mr. Trump then used his free hand to lunge towards Bobby Engel, and when Mr. Ornato had recounted this story to me, he had motioned towards his clavicles.
And was Mr. Engel in the room as Mr. Ornato told you this story?
He was.
Did Mr. Engel correct or disagree with any part of this story from Mr. Ornato?
Mr. Engel did not correct or disagree with any part of the story.
Did Mr. Engel or Mr. Ornato ever after that tell you that what Mr. Ornato had just said was untrue?
Neither Mr. Ornato nor Mr. Engel told me ever that it was untrue.
And despite this altercation, this physical altercation, during the ride back to the White House, President Trump still demanded to go to the Capitol. Here's what Kayleigh McEnany, the White House press secretary at the time, wrote in her personal notes and told the committee about President Trump's desire to go to the Capitol after returning to the White House.
When you wrote POTUS wanted to walk to the Capitol, was that based solely on what the president said during his speech or anything that he or anybody else said afterwards?
So to the best of my recollection, I believe when we got back to the White House, he said he wanted to physically walk with the marchers, and according to my notes, he then said he'd be fine with just riding the Beast. But to the best of my recollection, he wanted to be a part of the march in some fashion.
Okay, and just for the record, the Beast refers to the presidential limousine?
Yes.
President Trump did not go to the Capitol that day. We understand that he blamed Mark Meadows for that.
So prior to leaving the rally site, when he got off the stage and everybody was making the movement back to the motorcade, I had overheard Mr. Meadows say to him then, as I had prior to Mr. Trump taking the stage that morning, that he was still working on getting an off-the-record movement to the Capitol. So when Mr. Trump took the stage, he was under the impression via Mr. Meadows that it was still possible. So when he got off the stage, I had relayed to Mr. Meadows that I had another conversation with Tony. The movement was still not possible. Mr. Meadows said, okay. And then as they proceeded to go to the motorcade, and Mr. Meadows had reiterated, we're going to work on it. So I talked to Bobby. Bobby has more information. Mark got into his vehicle, to my understanding. Trump got into the Beast. And after we had all arrived back at the White House, later in the day, it had been relayed to me via Mark that the president wasn't happy that Bobby didn't pull it off for him and that Mark didn't work hard enough to get the movement on the books.
The physical altercation that Ms. Hutchinson described in the presidential vehicle was not the first time that the president had become very angry about issues relating to the election. On December 1, 2020, Attorney General Barr said in an interview that the Department of Justice had not found evidence of widespread election fraud sufficient to change the outcome of the election. Ms. Hutchinson, how did the president react to hearing that news?
Around the time that I understand the AP article went live, I remember hearing noise coming from down the hallway, so I poked my head out of the office, and I saw the valet walking towards our office. He had said, get the chief down to the dining room, the president wants him. So Mark went down to the dining room and came back to the office a few minutes later. After Mark had returned, I left the office and went down to the dining room, and I noticed that the door was propped open and the valet was inside the dining room changing the tablecloth off of the dining room table. He motioned for me to come in and then pointed towards the front of the room near the fireplace mantel and the TV, where I first noticed there was ketchup dripping down the wall and there's a shattered porcelain plate on the floor. The valet had articulated that the president was extremely angry at the Attorney General's AP interview and had thrown his lunch against the wall, which was causing them to have to clean up. So I grabbed a towel and started wiping the ketchup off of the wall to help the valet out. And he said something to the effect of, he's really ticked off about this. I would stay clear of him for right now. He's really, really ticked off about this right now.
And Ms. Hutchinson, was this the only instance that you are aware of where the president threw dishes?
It's not.
And are there other instances in the dining room that you recall where he expressed his anger?
There were several times throughout my tenure with the Chief of Staff that I was aware of him either throwing dishes or flipping the tablecloth to let all the contents of the table go onto the floor and likely break or go everywhere.
And Ms. Hutchinson, Attorney General Barr described to the committee the president's angry reaction when he finally met with President Trump. Let's listen.
And I said, look, I know that you're dissatisfied with me, and I'm glad to offer my resignation. And he pounded the table very hard. Everyone sort of jumped, and he said, accept it.
Mr. Chairman, I reserve.
Gentlewoman reserves. The chair requests those in the hearing room to remain seated until the Capitol Police have escorted our witness from the room. Pursuant to the order of the committee of today, the chair declares the committee in recess for a period of approximately 10 minutes.
Okay, a lot of information. When they said that this would be explosive enough to hold an an unplanned hearing. Yeah, they pretty much hit that nail on the head. Okay, so a lot that we have to go over. Before we jump into just a quick overview of what all of this means, I would just ask for people who've just joined in on this live stream, if you haven't yet subscribed, if you can please subscribe to my channel, that would be highly appreciated. Okay, just a few things I want to go over. First of all, this idea that White House counsel Pat Cipollone warned that Trump shouldn't go to the Capitol because, quote, "We're going to get charged with every crime imaginable, including obstructing justice or defrauding," she said, defrauding the electoral count. In other words, the White House knew, Trump knew, the legal exposure that they faced by virtue of going to the Capitol, and yet still, Trump tried as hard as he possibly could to get to the Capitol, to march there, to participate in an insurrection with these insurrectionists, to the point that, I mean, this was the wildest story I think I've ever heard. I tried to write down as much of it as I could, but Trump was so intent on going to the Capitol that when he told he would be returning to the White House, he, quote, had a very strong, very angry response. He said, "I'm the effing president, take me up to the Capitol now." He then reached forward to grab the steering wheel. When he was stopped by a Secret Service agent, he lunged for his neck, came back in, found out that Bill Barr had done an interview with the AP where he admitted that there was no fraud. He was so angry about that he threw his lunch against the wall. And then, of course, we just heard Cassidy Hutchinson explain that this was not the only time that Trump had thrown his food or his dishes against the wall. A petulant child, a fucking child, this guy is. This is the guy who we're supposed to believe is like the peak of strength, that he throws his ketchup against the wall. He's a 9-year-old. But I think more importantly than the fact that he's a 9-year-old is the fact that he knew the legal exposure that they had. The White House knew the legal exposure that they had by virtue of going to the Capitol with these people who they themselves already knew were armed. For all these Republicans who claim that, these were unarmed, peaceful protesters, they had AR-15s, they had Glock-style pistols. We just heard the chatter from the I believe it was the Capitol Police, admitting that these weapons were present, that they saw AR-15s all through the Capitol walk between the rally and the U.S. Capitol. And to further underscore to the extent to which they not only knew about this violence but didn't care about it, Hutchinson testified that when she told Meadows about the Capitol actually being overrun, quote, he almost had a lack of reaction. They didn't care. The violence was the point. Any normal person, if you find out that there are AR-15s on your way to where you're going, you'd say, oh, maybe we shouldn't go there. Maybe we should do what we can to put an end to this. This was so unremarkable to Mark Meadows and this White House team that he didn't even look up from his phone when he was told by both Cassidy Hutchinson and Tony Ornato previously about the violence at the Capitol or the fact that these people were armed. They didn't care. The violence was the point. That was the goal for these people. Even Trump himself said, quote, "Take the effing mags away, the metal detectors. They're not here to hurt me. Take the effing mags away, then we can march to the Capitol." Trump knew that these people were armed. He didn't care. He didn't even want the mags. He didn't even want the metal detectors. He wanted them to come in armed so that they and he could then march to the Capitol together. After he'd been told that these people had weapons, that they weren't even allowed to enter the ellipse, the rally, because they had weapons and they wouldn't get in. So he knew that these people were staying far away because they had their weapons. They wouldn't pass clearance to be at the rally to watch him speak. He didn't care. He didn't care because he knew that they weren't going to use those weapons to hurt him. Those weapons were for other people. But he knew. He was told numerous times, and that's the damning part about all of this. I mean, we can go over the extent to which Trump knew of all of this illegality. And we will go over the extent to which Trump knew about all this illegality, all the way from hearing number 1, where Alex Cannon and Bill Barr and even Ivanka Trump all testified that there was no fraud and that Trump knew the truth and yet opted to move forward with this scheme, this election theft scheme anyway, all the way to right now, where he was even notified that there were weapons, to the point where they wouldn't even be able to get in to hear his speech at the Ellipse at the rally. He knew that there were weapons, said, I didn't care, take the mags away, they're not here to hurt me, suggesting that he clearly knew that they were there to hurt somebody. I mean, weapons aren't flowers, right? Weapons are there to hurt somebody. They're not here to hurt me. Take the mags away, and then I can march with them to the Capitol. He wanted to join the insurrectionists as they were pursuing their insurrection at the U.S. Capitol with their weapons, with their gallows to hang Mike Pence. The extent to which these people knew to which these people all in the White House knew exactly what was going on can't be understated. Trump knew exactly what he was doing. All of his quotes that day in this testimony reveal that. And by the way, I know that the judiciary, the Republicans' judiciary count, clearly run by Jim Jordan, said, LOL, no one is watching this. I have more live viewers on my live stream now than in any of the other 5 hearings. People are watching this. And the reason that they're so hell-bent on trying to will into existence this idea that no one's watching is because this is so incredibly damning for them. Not only the fact that they all knew what was going on. They all know the truth about fraud in this election. They all knew the truth about there being no path to victory. They all knew the truth, these Republican congressmen, about the fact that this whole scheme was illegal, because they then followed that up by asking for a presidential pardon. Every single element of this is bad for them. House Judiciary. No one, LOL, no one is watching this. Americans are wondering where the hearing is on $5 gas. Yeah, I'm sure people watching this are wondering about gas. Although the better question would be, why did Republicans vote against any and all measures to actually bring the prices of gas down? All of the Republicans, save 1 or 2, voted against a measure to stop price gouging at the pump. And then they turn around and say, why is there $5 gas? Also, about a month or 2 ago, they were saying, stop coddling Putin. Why don't you cut off Russian oil imports? We cut off Russian oil imports. As does a lot of other countries in the world. Oil is traded on the global market. The price goes up because the supply goes down, and then we have $5 gas. And then those same people who are saying ban Russian imports of oil are saying, hey, wait, why do we have $5 gas? Gas. So anyway, that's all I'm going to say about that. It's just bad faith all around. But in any case, everything that we've heard from this committee today. Probably some of the most striking testimony in any of the 5 hearings. Again, Trump had been so hell-bent on making sure that he could march with the insurrectionists to the U.S. Capitol, even though he knew these people were armed. These people had AR-15s, they had Glock-style pistols. He refused to... He tried to get the Secret Service not to make sure that any rally goers went through magnometers, the metal detectors, because he knew that he wasn't in danger by virtue of these people having weapons. He didn't care. He knew that all of these people with guns and semi-automatic weapons were not there to shoot him. They were there to shoot somebody else. He goes, quote, "They're not here to hurt me." What does that tell you? If they're not there to hurt him, but they have these AR-15s and these Glock-style pistols, what are they there to do? Who are they there to hurt? He knew full well, because he's not a dummy. He's corrupt, but he's not a dummy. He knew exactly what he was doing. And he was trying to bolster what these people were doing, to validate what these people were trying to do by virtue of walking with them to the Capitol, where they would go on to try to assassinate the vice president, assassinate the Democratic Speaker of the House. We learned last time that these insurrectionists were like 40 feet away from Mike Pence. At which point, Trump tweeted how displeased he was that Pence didn't unilaterally overturn the election for Donald Trump. At the moment that they knew that there were insurrectionists 40 feet away, he threw all that gas on the fire and tweeted about how Pence was unilaterally responsible for not carrying out this scheme, this illegal, unconstitutional scheme. I mean, pretty remarkable stuff. Only to have the cherry on top, which shows that Trump was so angry that Bill Barr had done an interview, I believe with the AP, saying that there was no election fraud, admitting that there was no election fraud, to the point that he threw his lunch against the wall. Because his only goal in this was to feed the narrative that there was fraud, even though he knew it was a false narrative, even though we already have taped sworn deposition from Bill Barr himself admitting that he told Trump that there was no fraud and that Trump was so livid that he just sought to ignore it. Because it wasn't about the truth, it was about lying to these people to feed the narrative so that they could then march on the Capitol and carry out this coup that they sought to carry out. This was all on purpose. And so, if anything, that is evidence of corrupt intent, because Trump carried all of this out knowing, after having been told, and we know they were told because they testified to this under oath, that there was no fraud, that there was no path to victory for him. He sought to do it anyway, because the goal wasn't to find fraud, it was to defraud people and obstruct a congressional proceeding. So look, I'll be a broken record here. I know the DOJ is watching. I know Merrick Garland is watching. I know these investigations are unfolding concurrently. I know they're sharing information and that they're sharing witness testimony and documents. But watching this stuff is so important because so many people knowing what happened on that day in public allows us to ratchet up this pressure on the DOJ to do something about this. We'll continue having these hearings. We'll continue finding out more information about what Trump knew and how he sought to lie in public anyway. But I think it's so important because the more people that recognize that Trump not only lied, but he did so with corrupt intent, the more pressure is put on the DOJ to actually do something about this. That's why this committee is so important, because all of this would be happening behind the scenes. Then it's up to like a few prosecutors, ultimately Merrick Garland, just to decide what to do or if the case is strong enough. But now, when the entire country is watching this stuff, when I have more people watching this stream than any of the other 5 streams, just a microcosm of how much people are continuing to stay engaged in this stuff, I think that really allows like this pressure to build. And I spoke with Glenn Kirshner, a former federal prosecutor, a few weeks ago, and he said pressure like this bursts pipes. Don't think that the DOJ doesn't feel this. Don't think that Merrick Garland doesn't feel this. Every time one of these committee hearings happen, and it is the top story in the news, everyone is watching this. More people are watching this than World Series games. Don't think that they don't see that and that isn't felt. Okay, it looks like the committee is coming back in. Before we jump back in, I would just ask one more time, if you haven't subscribed to my channel and you enjoy my commentary or my other regular videos that I do, please subscribe to this channel. It's free, doesn't cost you anything, and it would help me out a lot. That's the best way to support what I do, is to subscribe. So thank you for subscribing.
Committee will be in order. Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Vice Chair Cheney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before we turn to what Ms. Hutchinson saw and heard in the White House during the violent attack on the Capitol on January 6th, let's discuss certain communications White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows had on January 5th. President Trump's associate, Roger Stone, attended rallies during the afternoon and the evening of January 5th in Washington, D.C. On January 5th and 6th, Mr. Stone was photographed with multiple members of the Oath Keepers, who were allegedly serving as his security detail. As we now know, multiple members of that organization have been charged with or pled guilty to crimes associated with January 6th. Mr. Stone has invoked his Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination before this committee. General Michael Flynn has also taken the fifth before this committee. Mr. Stone previously had been convicted of other federal crimes unrelated to January 6th. General Flynn had pleaded guilty to a felony charge also predating and unrelated to January 6th. President Trump pardoned General Flynn just weeks after the presidential election. And in July of 2020, he commuted the sentence Roger Stone was to serve. The night before January 6th, President Trump instructed his Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, to contact both Roger Stone and Michael Flynn regarding what would play out the next day. Ms. Hutchinson, is it your understanding that President Trump asked Mark Meadows to speak with Roger Stone and General Flynn on January 5th?
That's correct. That is my understanding.
And Ms. Hutchinson, is it your understanding that Mr. Meadows called Mr. Stone on the 5th?
I'm under the impression that Mr. Meadows did complete both a call to Mr. Stone and General Flynn the evening of the 5th.
And do you know what they talked about that evening, Ms. Hutchinson?
I'm not sure.
Is it your understanding that Mr. Giuliani, Mr. Eastman, and others had set up what has been called, quote, a war room at the Willard Hotel on the night of the 5th?
I was aware of that the night of the 5th.
And do you know if Mr. Meadows ever intended to go to the Willard Hotel on the night of the 5th?
Mr. Meadows had a conversation with me where he wanted me to work with Secret Service on a movement from the White House to the Willard Hotel so he could attend the meeting or meetings with Mr. Giuliani and his associates in the war room.
And what was your view as to whether or not Mr. Meadows should go to the Willard that night?
I had made it clear to Mr. Meadows that I didn't believe it was a smart idea for him to go to the Willard Hotel that night. I wasn't sure everything that was going on at the Willard Hotel, although I knew enough about what Mr. Giuliani and his associates were pushing during this period. I didn't think that it was something appropriate for the White House Chief of Staff to attend or to consider involvement in. I made that clear to Mr. Meadows. Throughout the afternoon, he mentioned a few more times going up to the Willard Hotel that evening, and then eventually dropped the subject the night of the 5th and said that he would dial in instead.
So General Flynn has appeared before this committee, and when he appeared before our committee, he took the 5th. Let's briefly view a clip of General Mike Flynn taking the Fifth Amendment. General Flynn, do you believe the violence on January 6th was justified?
Do we have?
Yes.
All right, we're back. Congressman Cheney, could you repeat the question, please?
Yes. General Flynn, do you believe the violence on January 6th was justified?
Is that, can I get a clarification? Is that a moral question or are you asking a legal question?
I'm asking both.
I said the Fifth.
Do you believe the violence on January 6th was justified morally?
Take the Fifth.
You believe the violence on January 6th was justified legally?
Fifth.
General Flynn, do you believe in the peaceful transition of power in the United States of America?
The Fifth.
Let's move on now to January 6th and the conduct of Donald Trump and Mark Meadows during the attack on the Capitol. Ms. Hutchinson, I'd like now for us to listen to a description, your description of what transpired in the West Wing during the attack. For context, in this clip, you describe the time frame starting at about 2 p.m.
So I remember Mark being alone in his office for quite some time, and I know we've spoken about Ben Williamson going in at one point, and I don't personally remember Ben going in. I don't doubt that he had gone in, but I remember him being alone in his office for most of the afternoon, around 2 o'clock to 2:05. Around 2 o'clock to 2:05, we were watching the TV, and I could see that the rioters were getting closer and closer to the Capitol. Mark still hadn't popped out of his office or said anything about it. So that's when I went into his office. I saw that he was sitting on his couch, on his cell phone. Same as the morning where he was just kind of scrolling and typing. I said, "Hey, are you watching the TV, Chief?" Because his TV was small, and you can see it, but I didn't know if he was really paying attention. I said, "You watching the TV, Chief?" And he was like, "Yeah." So, the rioters are getting really close. Have you talked to the president? He said, "No, he wants to be alone right now." Still looking at his phone. So I start to get frustrated because I sort of felt like I was watching this is not a great comparison, but a bad car accident that was about to happen where you can't stop it, but you want to be able to do something. And I remember thinking in that moment, Mark needs to snap out of this, and I don't know how to snap him out of this, but he needs to care. And I just remember I blurted out, I said, "Mark, do you know where Jim's at right now?" And he looked up at me at that point and said, "Jim?" And I said, "Mark, he was on the floor a little while ago giving a floor speech. Did you listen?" He said, "Yeah, it was real good. Did you like it?" And I said, "Yeah. Do you know where he's at right now?" He said, "Well, no, I haven't heard from him." And I said, "You might want to check in with him, Mark." And I remember pointing at the TV and I said, "The rioters are getting close. They might get in." And he looked at me and said something to the effect of, "All right, I'll give him a call."
Not long after the rioters broke into the Capitol, you described what happened with White House counsel Pat Cipollone.
No more than a minute and a half later, I see Pat Cipollone barreling down the hallway towards our office and rushed right in, looked at me, said, "Is Mark in his office?" And I said, "Yes." He just looked at me and started shaking his head and went over, opened Mark's office door, stood there with the door propped open, and said something to Mark is still sitting on his phone. I remember glancing and he's still sitting on his phone. And I remember Pat saying to him something to the effect of, "The rioters have gotten to the Capitol, Mark. We need to go down and see the president now." And Mark looked up at him and said, "He doesn't want to do anything, Pat." And Pat said something to the effect of, and very clearly had said this to Mark, something to the effect of, "Mark, something needs to be done or people are going to die and the blood's going to be on your effing hands. This is getting out of control. I'm going down there." And at that point, Mark stood up from his couch, both of his phones in his hand. He had his glasses on still. He walked out with Pat. He put both of his phones on my desk and said, "Let me know if Jim calls." And they walked out and went down to the dining room.
A few minutes later, Representative Jordan called back.
A couple minutes later, so likely around between 2:15 and 2:25. I know the tweet went out at 2:24. I don't remember if I was there when the tweet went out or if it happened right afterwards, but Jim had called. I answered the phone, said 1 second. He knew it was, I guess he knew it was me. I introduced myself, but I don't remember if he called my cell phone or if he had called one of Mark's. But I answered the phone and said, 1 sec, Mark's down the hall, I'm going to go hand the phone to him. He said, "Okay." So I went down, I asked the valet if Mark was in the dining room. The valet said yes. I opened the door to the dining room, briefly stepped in to get Mark's attention, showed him the phone, flipped the phone his way so he could see it said Jim Jordan. He had stepped to where I was standing there holding the door open took the phone talking to Jim with the door still propped open. So I took a few steps back. So I probably was 2 feet from Mark. He was standing in the doorway going to the Oval Office dining room. They had a brief conversation, and in the crossfires, I heard briefly like what they were talking about, but in the background, I had heard conversations in the Oval dining room at that point talking about the hang Mike Pence chants.
So
that
they
clip
knew.
ended, Ms. Hutchinson, with you recalling that you heard the President, Mr. Meadows, and the White House counsel discussing the hang Mike Pence chants. And then you described for us what happened next.
It wasn't until Mark hung up the phone, handed it back to me. I went back to my desk. A couple minutes later, him and Pat came back, possibly Eric Hirschman too. I'm pretty sure Eric Hirschman was there. But I'm confident it was Pat that was there. I remember Pat saying something to the effect of, Mark, we need to do something more. They're literally calling for the vice president to be effing hung. And Mark had responded something to the effect of, you heard him, Pat. He thinks Mike deserves it. He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong. To which Pat said something, this is effing crazy. We need to be doing something more. Briefly stepped into Mark's office. And when Mark had said something, said something to the effect of, he doesn't think they're doing anything wrong, knowing what I had heard briefly in the dining room, coupled with Pat discussing the hang Mike Pence chants in the lobby of our office, and then Mark's response, I understood there to be the rioters in the Capitol that were chanting for the vice president to be hung.
Let me pause here on this point. As rioters chanted hang Mike Pence, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, said that, quote, Mike deserves it, and that those rioters were not doing anything wrong. This is a sentiment that he has expressed at other times as well. In an interview with ABC News correspondent Jonathan Karl, President Trump was asked about the supporters chanting hang Mike Pence last year. Instead of condemning them, the former president defended them.
Because it's common sense, John. It's common sense that you're supposed to protect. How can you, if you know a vote is fraudulent, right? Yeah. How can you pass on a fraudulent vote to Congress?
President Trump's view that the rioters...
But he knew it wasn't fraudulent because he was told by Bill Barr that it wasn't fraudulent already.
We're not doing anything wrong, and that, quote, Mike deserved it, helps us to understand why the president did not ask the rioters to leave the Capitol for multiple hours. In fact, he put this tweet out at 2:24 p.m. Ms. Hutchinson, do you recall seeing this tweet in which the president said the vice president did not have the courage to do what needed to be done?
I do.
And Ms. Hutchinson, what was your reaction when you saw this tweet?
As a staffer that worked to always represent the administration to the best of my ability and to showcase the good things that he had done for the country, I remember feeling frustrated, disappointed, and really, it felt personal. It was really sad. As an American, I was disgusted. It was unpatriotic. It was un-American. We were watching the Capitol building get defaced over a lie. And it was something that was really hard in that moment to digest, knowing what I'd been hearing down the hall in the conversations that were happening, seeing that tweet come up and knowing what was happening on the Hill. And it's something that I still struggled to work through the emotions of that.
Ms. Hutchinson, we have also spoken to multiple other White House staff about their reaction to Donald Trump's 224 tweet, condemning Mike Pence for not having the courage to refuse to count electoral votes, an act that would have been illegal. Matthew Pottinger, a former Marine intelligence officer who served in the White House for 4 years, including as Deputy National Security Advisor, was in the vicinity of the Oval Office at various points throughout the day. When he saw that tweet, he immediately decided to resign his position. Let's watch him describe his reaction to the president's tweet.
One of my staff brought me a printout of a tweet by the president. And the tweet said something to the effect that Mike Pence, the vice president, didn't have the courage to do what should have been done. I read that tweet and made a decision at that moment to resign. That's where I knew that I was leaving that day, once I read that tweet.
Ultimately, members of the White House staff, Sarah Matthews, cabinet members Secretary Chao and Secretary DeVos resigned as well. Here is Secretary DeVos's resignation letter. As you can see, in resigning on January 6th, Secretary DeVos said to the president, quote, "There's no mistaking the impact your rhetoric had on the situation, and it is the inflection point for me." Let's also look at Secretary Chao's resignation statement. When Secretary Chao resigned, she spoke of the January 6th attack, and she said, quote, "As I am sure is the case with many of you, this has deeply troubled me in a way I simply cannot set aside." Ms. Hutchinson, in our prior interviews, we've asked you about what the president's advisors were urging him to do during the attack. You've described roughly 3 different camps of thought inside the White House that day. Can you tell us about those?
There was a group of individuals that were strongly urging him to take immediate and swift action. I would classify the White House counsel's office, Mr. Hirschman, Ms. Ivanka Trump, in that category of really working to get him to take action and pleading with him to take action. There was a more neutral group where advisors were trying to toe the line, knowing that Mr. Trump didn't necessarily want to take immediate action and condemn the riots, but knowing something needed to be done. And then there was the last group, which was deflect and blame. Let's blame Antifa. These aren't our people. It's my understanding that Mr. Meadows was in the deflect and blame category, but he did end up taking a more neutral route, knowing that there were several advisors in the president's circle urging him to take more action, which I think was reflected in the rhetoric released later that day in the videos.
You told us that the White House counsel's office was in the camp encouraging the president to tell the rioters to stop the attack and to leave the Capitol. Let's listen.
White House counsel's office wanted there to be a strong statement out to condemn the rioters. I'm confident in that.
Now let's look at just one example of what some senior advisors to the president were urging. Ms. Hutchinson, could you look at the exhibit that we're showing on the screen now? Have you seen this note before?
That's a note that I wrote at the direction of the Chief of Staff on January 6th, likely around 3 o'clock.
And it's written on a Chief of Staff note card, but that's your handwriting, Ms. Hutchinson?
That's my handwriting.
And why did you write this note?
The Chief of Staff was in a meeting with Eric Hirschman and potentially Mr. Philbin, and they had rushed out of the office fairly quickly. Mark had handed me the note card with one of his pens and started dictating a statement for the president to potentially put out.
And, no, I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. There were 2 phrases on there, one illegal and then one without proper authority. The illegal phrase was the one that Mr. Meadows had dictated to me, Mr. Hirschman had chimed in and said, also put without legal authority. There should have been a slash between the two phrases. It was an or if the president had opted to put one of those statements out. Evidently he didn't. Later that afternoon, Mark came back from the Oval Dining Room and put the palm card on my desk with illegally crossed out, but said we didn't need to take further action on that statement.
So, to your knowledge, this statement was never issued?
It was, to my knowledge, it was never issued.
And Ms. Hutchinson, did you understand that Ivanka Trump wanted her father to send people home?
That's my understanding, yes.
Let's play a clip of you addressing that issue.
I remember her saying at various points, you know, she wanted her dad to send them home. She wanted her dad to tell them to go home peacefully, and she wanted to include language that he necessarily wasn't on board with at the time.
You will hear more about this at our later hearings, but we have evidence of many others imploring Donald Trump and Mark Meadows to take action. Here is some of that evidence, text messages sent to Mark Meadows during the attack. This is a text message at 2:32 from Laura Ingram. Hey, Mark, the president needs to tell people in the Capitol to go home. In the next message, this is hurting all of us. And then he's destroying his legacy and playing into every stereotype. We lose all credibility against the BLM Antifa crowd if things go south. The president's son, Don Jr., also urgently contacted Mark Meadows. At 2:53, he wrote, he's got to condemn this shit ASAP. The Capitol Police tweet is not enough. As you will see, these are just two of the numerous examples of Trump supporters and allies urging the president to tell his supporters to leave the Capitol. It would not have been hard for the president to simply walk down to the briefing room a few feet down the hall from the Oval Office. As Norah O'Donnell noted during an interview with House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy, where Leader McCarthy said he believed the attack was un-American.
I want to quickly bring in Kevin McCarthy, the House Minority Leader. Leader McCarthy, do you condemn this violence?
I completely condemn the violence in the Capitol. What we're currently watching unfold is un-American. I am disappointed. I'm sad. This is not what our country should look like. This is not who we are. This is not the First Amendment. This has to stop, and this has to stop now.
Leader McCarthy, the President of the United States has a briefing room steps from the Oval Office. The cameras are hot 24/7, as you know. Why hasn't he walked down and said that now?
I conveyed to the president what I think is best to do, and I'm hopeful the president will do it.
Republican House member Mike Gallagher also implored the president to call off the attack.
Mr. President, you have got to stop this. You are the only person who can call this off. Call it off. The election is over. Call it off. This is bigger than you. It's bigger than any member of Congress. It is about the United States of America, which is more important than any politician. Call it off. It's over.
Despite the fact that many people close to Donald Trump were urging him to send people home, he did not do so until later, much later. At 4:17 p.m., Donald Trump finally told the rioters to go home and that he loved them. Here's a portion of the video President Trump recorded from the White House.
We have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special. You've seen what happens. You see the way others are treated that are so bad and so evil. I know how you feel. But go home and go home in peace.
But as we will show in even greater detail in future hearings, Donald Trump was reluctant to put this message out, and he still could not bring himself to condemn the attack. Ms. Hutchinson has told us that too.
The one that he put out at 4:17.
I'm sure you've discussed it, and just to elaborate if I hadn't already at that point, I recall him being reluctant to film the video on the 6th. I was not involved in any of the logistics or the planning for that video. I just remember seeing the video go out and feeling a little shocked after it went out.
On the evening of January 6th and the day after, the president's family and his senior staff and others tried to encourage the president to condemn the violence and commit to the peaceful transition of power. At 3:31 p.m. on January 6th, Sean Hannity of Fox News texted Mark Meadows. Mr. Hannity said, quote, "Can he make a statement? I saw the tweet. Ask people to leave the Capitol." Later that evening, Mr. Hannity sent another text message to Mark Meadows. This time, he shared a link to a tweet. That tweet reported that President Trump's cabinet secretaries were considering invoking the 25th Amendment to remove President Trump from office. As you can see on the screen, the 25th Amendment to the Constitution creates a process for the transition of power if a president is unfit or unable to serve. The 25th Amendment has never been used to remove a president. But the committee has learned that after the attack on the U.S. Capitol, this was being discussed by members of President Trump's cabinet as a way of stripping the full power of the presidency from Donald Trump. President Trump's supporters were worried. In addition to the tweet that he sent Mark Meadows after the attack, Sean Hannity apparently spoke with President Trump and warned him about what could happen. We understand that this text message that Sean Hannity sent to Kayleigh McEnany on January 7th shows what Mr. Hannity said to the president. First, no more stolen election talk. Second, impeachment and 25th Amendment are real. Many people will quit. Ms. Hutchinson, you told us that you were hearing about discussions related to the 25th Amendment. Here's part of what you said.
Mr. Pompeo reached out to have the conversation with Mr. Meadows in case he hadn't heard the discussions amongst cabinet secretaries. And from what I understand, it was more of a, this is what I'm hearing. I want you to be aware of it, but I also think it's worth putting on your radar because you are the chief of staff. You're technically the boss of all the cabinet secretaries. And, you know, if conversations progress, you should be ready to take action on this. Like, I'm concerned for you and your positioning with this. You know, reach out to me if you have any questions or like I can be helpful with you at all.
Inside the White House, the president's advisors, including members of his family, wanted him to deliver a speech to the country. Deputy White House counsel Pat Philbin prepared the first draft of what would be the president's remarks on national healing, delivered via pre-taped video on January 7th. When he arrived at the White House on the 7th, Mr. Philbin believed that more needed to be said, so he sat down and started writing. He shared the draft with Pat Cipollone, who also believed the president needed to say more. Mr. Cipollone agreed with the content, as did Eric Hirschman, who reviewed the draft. The committee has learned that the president did not agree with the substance as drafted and resisted giving a speech at all. Ms. Hutchinson, do you recall discussions about the president's speech on January 7th?
I do.
Let's listen, Ms. Hutchinson, to what you told us about that and about the process of crafting those remarks.
I learned from a conversation with Mark and overhearing between him and White House counsel and Eric Hirschman as well that Trump didn't necessarily think he needed to do anything more on the 7th than what he had already done on the 6th. When he was convinced to put out a video on the 7th, I understand that he had a lot of opinions about what the context of that announcement were to entail. I had original drafts of the speech where there were several lines that didn't make it in there about prosecuting the rioters or calling them violent. he didn't want that in there. He wanted to put in there that he wanted to potentially pardon them. And this is just with the increased emphasis of his mindset at the time, which was he didn't think that they did anything wrong. The people who did something wrong that day, or the person who did something wrong that day, was Mike Pence by not standing with him.
But the president's advisors urged him to give the speech.
Who convinced him to do the video on the 7th?
I'm not sure who convinced him or if it was a group of people that convinced him.
Who was in the group that you're aware of?
That I'm aware of: Mark, Ivanka, Jared Kushner, Eric Hirschman, Pat Cipollone, Pat Philbin. Those are the people that I'm aware of.
Do you know why that group of people thought it was necessary for him to release a statement?
I believe Kayleigh McEnany as well. From what I understood at the time, and from what the reports were coming in, there's a large concern of the 25th Amendment potentially being invoked, and there were concerns about what would happen in the Senate if the 25th was invoked. So the primary reason that I had heard, other than, we did not do enough on the 6th, we need to get a stronger message out there and condemn this, otherwise this will be your legacy. The secondary reason to that was, think about what might happen in the final 15 days of your presidency if we don't do this. There's already talks about invoking the 25th Amendment. You need this as cover.
The president ultimately delivered the remarks. Unlike many of his other speeches, he did not ad-lib much. He recited them without significant alteration, except one. Even then, on January 7th, 2021, the day after the attack on the U.S. Capitol, the president still could not bring himself to say, quote, "But this election is now over." One other point about the speech, Ms. Hutchinson. Did you hear that Mr. Trump at one point wanted to add language about pardoning those who took part in the January 6th riot?
I did hear that, and I understand that Mr. Meadows was encouraging that language as well.
Thank you, and here's what you told us previously about that.
You said he was instructed not to include it. Who was instructing him not to include language about the pardon in that January 7th?
I understood from White House counsel's office coming into our office that morning that they didn't think that it was a good idea to include that in the speech.
That being Pat Cipollone?
That's correct. And Eric Hirschman.
Ms. Hutchinson, did Rudy Giuliani ever suggest that he was interested in receiving a presidential pardon related to January 6th?
He did.
Ms. Hutchinson, did White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows ever indicate that he was interested in receiving a presidential pardon related to January 6th?
Mr. Meadows did seek that pardon. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Ms. Hutchinson. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I want to thank our witness for joining us today. The members of the Select Committee may have additional questions for today's witness, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to those questions. Without objections, members will be permitted 10 business days to submit statements for the record, including opening remarks and additional questions for the witness. Without objection, the chair recognizes the vice chair for a closing statement.
Wow.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to begin by thanking Ms. Hutchinson for her testimony today. We are all in her debt. Our nation is preserved by those who abide by their oaths to our Constitution. Our nation is preserved by those who know the fundamental difference between right and wrong. And I want all Americans to know that what Ms. Hutchinson has done today is not easy. The easy course is to hide from the spotlight, to refuse to come forward, to attempt to downplay or deny what happened. That brings me to a different topic. While our committee has seen many witnesses, including many Republicans, testify fully and forthrightly, this has not been true of every witness. And we have received evidence of one particular practice that raises significant concern. Our committee commonly asks witnesses connected to Mr. Trump's administration or campaign whether they've been contacted by any of their former colleagues or anyone else who attempted to influence or impact their testimony. Without identifying any of the individuals involved, let me show you a couple of samples of answers we received to this question. First, here's how one witness described phone calls from people interested in that witness's testimony. Quote, "What they said to me is as long as I continue to be a team player, they know I'm on the right team. I'm doing the right thing. I'm protecting who I need to protect. You know I'll continue to stay in good graces in Trump world. And they have reminded me a couple of times that Trump does read transcripts, and just keep that in mind as I proceed through my interviews with the committee."
Just mobsters.
Here's another sample in a different context. This is a call received by one of our witnesses. Quote, "A person let me know you have your deposition tomorrow. He wants me to let you know he's thinking about you. He knows you're loyal and you're going to do the right thing when you go in for your deposition." I think most Americans know that attempting to influence witnesses to testify untruthfully presents very serious concerns. We will be discussing these issues as a committee, carefully considering our next steps. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I yield back.
Damn.
Gentlewoman yields back. Ms. Hutchinson, thank you. Thank you for doing your patriotic duty and helping the American people get a complete understanding of January 6th and its causes. Thank you for your courage in testifying here today. You have the gratitude of this committee and your country. I know it wasn't easy to sit here today and answer these questions, but after hearing your testimony in all its candor and detail, I want to speak directly to the handful of witnesses who have been outliers in our investigation, the small number who have defied us outright, those whose memories have failed them again and again on the most important details, and to those who fear Donald Trump and his enablers. Because of this courageous woman and others like her, your attempt to hide the truth from the American people will fail. And to that group of witnesses, if you've heard this testimony today and suddenly you remember things you couldn't previously recall, or there are some details you'd like to clarify, or you discovered some courage you had hidden away somewhere, our doors remain open. The Select Committee will reconvene in the weeks ahead as we continue to lay out our findings to the American people. The chair requests those in the hearing room to remain seated until the Capitol Police have escorted the witness and members from the room. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.
Wow. Okay. Probably the most explosive day of testimony that we've seen so far. I don't even know where we begin with all of this stuff. I just want to recount what I think some of the most important points are in all of this, starting with, I think, one of the most explosive parts of the whole thing, which is that both Rudy Giuliani and Mark Meadows both sought a presidential pardon from Trump. If you needed, I mean, this is, and by the way, this is an aide to Mark Meadows, who's been, ostensibly loyal to Mark Meadows for the entirety of their time working together, who came to admit, to do her part in all of this, and admitted that her own boss, had sought a presidential pardon. So that is pretty wild news. Also, evidence of consciousness of guilt that these people would seek presidential pardons because, again, for the umpteenth time, they knew what they were doing was illegal that it was unconstitutional. They knew the truth because they'd been told the truth by people like Bill Barr, Alex Cannon, Hirschman. Even Ivanka Trump admitted that there was no fraud, and yet they pushed forward with these lies and these attempts to undermine the election results. Even with Eastman's plan that Mike Pence would be able to unilaterally overturn the election results or refuse to certify the electoral count, all of this was done knowing. That's what's most striking in all of this. Every single hearing, we find out what the illegal activity was. In Eastman's case, it was creating this plan, this unconstitutional plan, where Pence would be able to unilaterally decide whether or not he certified the election results. And we also have evidence behind the scenes where they themselves admit that what they were doing is unconstitutional. And so this was no different. We have an aide to Mark Meadows who kind of recounts every moment of that day of January 6th and the extent to which these people were armed, the extent to which these people were seeking to march to the Capitol, the far-right militia groups that were involved, and he didn't care because he knew that this violence was occurring. He knew that the goal was for this violence to occur. He was completely nonplussed about it, and at the end of all this, while he was, in that camp, like Hutchinson was explaining, where they were trying to deflect on behalf of Trump, at the same time, he requested a presidential pardon because he knew that everything he was advocating for was illegal. I think it's worth noting too that, and this doesn't have anything to do with the legal elements of this and whatnot, but I think it's important too to note that what Cassidy Hutchinson has done is basically made herself a pariah in the Republican Party, and the committee itself explained how she'd be facing death threats because of this, and it's true. And I mean, we heard about violence aimed toward Lady Ruby and Shay Moss in previous hearings. I believe that was 1 week ago today on last Tuesday's hearing. And these people will use this political violence as a tool to achieve their political ends. And so I think that that's especially important. It's what happened in the events leading up to January 6th, and it's what continues to happen now. And I have no doubt that you'll have the Steve Bannons of the world and the Rudy Giulianis of the world work overtime to defame this woman who came forward and testified under oath because she committed the crime of not going ahead with this illegal scheme to overturn the election results in the United States of America. Just wild. So just want to cover a few of what I think were the most striking points in all of this. Again, first, both Giuliani and Mark Meadows sought a presidential pardon from Trump. Again, that is as clear an admission of consciousness of guilt as you'll ever get. We also have, at the very end, we were let known about the fact that the January 6th committee has evidence that Trump-aligned figures were attempting to influence witnesses ahead of their depositions. I mean, just straight gangster stuff. Just like, hey, Trump reads these, and he's watching, and we hope you stay loyal, and good luck. Have a good time. Like, just straight gangster stuff. Written in writing. I mean, they got these messages from these people. No shame. The dichotomy between their danger and their intelligence is like you can fit the Titanic between those things, but that doesn't change the fact that if these people were being dangerous, they were attempting to influence witnesses, they were doing whatever they can to protect these people who again sought to overturn the election on Trump's behalf. One other thing that I thought was striking was we found out today that Trump was aware of the hang Mike Pence chants. So when Cassidy Hutchinson handed, I believe it was Jim Jordan was on the phone for Mark Meadows. She handed that phone call. Mark Meadows took that call with the door open, I believe, into the Oval Office, and Cassidy Hutchinson heard Trump and other figures, Trump world figures, talking in that Oval Office about the hang Mike Pence chants, which means that Trump knew that the crowd of insurrectionists was looking to assassinate him, which makes it all the more damning when Trump then went out and sent out those texts blaming Mike Pence and pouring fuel on the fire for not, going along with what he claimed was his duty, his obligation to refuse to certify the electoral votes. So Trump knew that people were looking to kill him, and instead of tamping down the situation, instead of bringing the temperature down, Trump started sending out sending out tweets that were pinning the blame on Mike Pence and just ramping up the pressure on him, which, by the way, just as an aside, makes it all the more ridiculous that Mike Pence still to this day doesn't have the courage to come forward and speak an ill word of Donald Trump. And half of that I blame on Mike Pence just being chicken shit, right? There's no way around that. He is just chicken shit. If this girl, Cassidy Hutchinson, this young girl, can come forward and complete this testimony publicly, and yet Mike Pence, the former vice president of the United States, doesn't have the balls to do that, then come on. Just the peak of fecklessness, spinelessness. He is a chicken shit through and through, full stop. It's half that. It's also half the fact that, this is what the Republican Party has devolved into. That even when your own party has tried to have you killed, still, it's such a cult of personality that you can't do anything about it. You can't speak ill of any of these people. You can't go against anything they've said. You can't publicly speak out. This is they'll crow about how the Republican Party is the party of Lincoln and courage and democracy and the Constitution. This is a reality TV host who tried to overthrow the U.S. government, who can't even get a single sentence out of his mouth without stumbling over, his glaring lack of vocabulary or intelligence. And yet, even Mike Pence, who's been in politics forever, guy who is the vice president of the United States, who could be at the end of his political career, it's not like he's at the beginning of his political career, can't even bring himself to speak one ill word of Donald Trump. And that goes for most of these people. I mean, yes, there are people like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger who are doing this work, and it is, courageous of them to do that, but both of them are going to lose their jobs. And so I think that's kind of a testament to what the Republican Party has become, that if you do deign to speak out against the most blatantly unconstitutional and illegal scheme in American history, that the party will abandon you in deference to the guy who committed, incited, inspired that scheme in the first place. The likelihood that Liz Cheney wins in Wyoming is slim. I believe Adam Kinzinger has already announced his retirement anyway. So just goes to show you what happens if you speak out against the mob boss in this party. And I use mob boss purposefully because these people were also seeking to, tamper with witnesses before they went in, just dangling little warnings, little threats wrapped as warnings, or threats wrapped as hey, we know you're loyal, right? So that's Mike Pence and the Republican Party. I think one more point that was especially galling. In his testimony, in his taped depositions, Liz Cheney asked Mike Flynn, who I believe is a 3-star general, do you believe in the peaceful transition of power in the United States of America? He said the fifth. He was asked if he believes in not even in this instance, just as a general rule, do you believe in the peaceful transition of power in the United States of America? He pled the fifth. If you needed an example of the Republican Party's refusal to embrace our institutions, democracy as a whole, the Constitution, it is the fact that this guy, under oath, couldn't bring himself to say that he believes in the peaceful transition of power in the United States of America. He doesn't believe in it. He doesn't think we should do it. That is insane to me. That is insane to me. And I think it betrays their entire worldview. not for nothing, but if you can't just admit that you think peaceful transfer of power is an okay thing, that you just generally, in theory, agree with it, then that shows like where you stand on the scale of democracy versus doing whatever you can to install an authoritarian, a dictator, a Christo-fascist, totalitarian ruler. That is the most insane part about this Michael Flynn testimony. He also obviously couldn't even answer whether violence was justified. He pleaded the fifth as to whether the violence was justified. And again, you don't plead the fifth if the answer is no, it wasn't justified, violence is never justified. Or no, of course I don't disagree with the notion that there should be a peaceful transition of power in the United States of America. Those seem like pretty easy things on their face, pretty unremarkable things on their face to say you agree with. The fact that he wasn't willing to say outright whether he agreed with those things, whether the violence was justified, pretty much betrays exactly where he stands. And it betrays where the Republican Party is these days right now, in the sense that, again, and I mentioned this in the previous break, Republicans are willing to use political violence as a tool to achieve whatever partisan political ends they're trying to achieve. They did it in the lead up to the election. They did it when they defamed people like those witnesses we heard last week, Lady Ruby and Shay Moss, where I believe Shay Moss had handed her mom a ginger mint, and you have all these Republican operatives claiming that they're passing USB drives with nefarious illegal votes that they were going to plug into computers and turn the results of the election. They were handing each other mints, ginger mints. They will destroy their lives to the point where they had to leave their houses because they didn't feel safe in their homes because all their information had gotten out. God knows what's going to happen to this girl, Cassidy Hutchinson, for committing the crime of telling the truth under oath. So we've heard of all of this political violence before. Obviously, January 6th was the peak of that, and they'll continue to use political violence as a means to achieve their ends. And so, that's where the Republican Party is right now. And I think that underscores the importance, even if you are not inherently political. If you think that political violence should be a tool in the United States to achieve your political ends, then the Republican Party is for you. But if you don't, if you're one of those people who I assume the vast majority of Americans are, then even if you agree with the Republicans' agenda, even if you don't think the Democrats are doing enough right now to confront the issues facing us, this is a foundational issue. Do we want to live in a country where you can commit violence to get what you want politically or not? And so gas prices and inflation aside, more broadly, if you think you should be able to incite coups, insurrections on the seat of government, then you have one party advocating for that. If you don't, if you think that the democratic process won't survive with that kind of thing, then you have an obligation to support Democrats because they are the only ones right now fighting against the Republicans to stop this. That's why I don't get, we had someone like, I forgot that witness's name. Let me see if I could find his name. One of let me know in the chat if you can remind me of the guy's name. He was bald. He was on last Tuesday's hearing, because that guy explained how, let me see if I can get this name for you. How he was the Arizona, I can't remember, he was from Arizona, the House Speaker in Arizona. He explained how, he wasn't willing to create this call into session Trump's fraud claims so they could discuss it further. Bowers, thank you, Rusty Bowers. I appreciate you guys letting me know. He would go to the ends of the earth and defend the Constitution, and he wouldn't move forward with Trump's fraud claims and call a special session. And yet, when they asked him later, would you vote for Donald Trump? He said yeah. He said, yeah. These people aren't going to save you. You can't look, even if you're a Republican, you can't look at the Adam Kinzingers and Liz Cheneys and be like, this is the answer to this, because it's not. Any votes for Republicans are validations of the Republicans' strategy more broadly. And so I think when you have, when you have people who who are independents, who are Republicans, or even Democrats who don't feel inspired to turn out right now, and I get it. Trust me. If there's anybody who feels like Democrats aren't doing enough to meet the moment right now, it's me. But we have a binary choice right now, and that is between a Republican Party who, even while admitting in these testimonies, almost to the point of tears, that what Donald Trump did was so unconstitutional, so antithetical to what this entire country stands for, they'd still vote for him. If that doesn't betray right there exactly what these people stand for, which is not much, then nothing will. So that's where we stand right now. Just want to take a quick moment. I think I'm going to end it here. If I would just ask, if you enjoyed this lead up into this January 6th hearing and kind of the wrap up at the end, and you want to hear more, I'll do live streams for every hearing moving forward, just like I've done for the last 5 of them before this. If you can please subscribe to my channel, it is free. And more broadly, please subscribe to other progressive media channels. I think it's important that our ecosystem is bolstered because right now the right wing owns social media. They own it on YouTube. They really own it on Facebook. I can't even begin to try to get a foothold on Facebook. It's exceedingly hard for any progressive or Democrat or left of center personality to try to break through Facebook. Facebook does everything it can to undermine voices from the left. But anyway, do what you can to support progressive media. If you can subscribe to this channel, subscribe to other progressive channels, it really helps the ecosystem as a whole. And when people come on looking to find some information, people who aren't political, they want to find out what happened today, and they come onto YouTube, they're either going to get directed toward the Ben Shapiros of the world, or they're going to get directed toward the people on the left. And I think, where I stand is I would much rather have them get that information from those of us on the left, especially when we know that the right was so heavily involved in all of this stuff. I mean, even we saw those texts from Mark Meadows from Fox News personalities like Laura Ingraham and Sean Hannity, where even the people giving the news are the ones directing Donald Trump in terms of what he should do to be more successful in his efforts to, overturn the election results and how to do PR afterwards. I mean, those don't seem like the people we should be getting our news from. So in any case, appreciate the subscribes. I believe that the next January 6th committee hearing won't be until July, which is only in a few days. But hopefully we hear something again soon. As soon as we have more information, I'll post in the community tab and create a video here that you can click notify me on so that you know exactly when these committee hearings are starting. So I think that's all. I'm going to stay for one quick sec in case anybody has questions that I can answer. Figure while people are watching, if there's more questions that I can answer, if something is burning, just let me know. Somebody said, do a sit down with your lawyer friend ASAP. I think that's in reference to Glenn Kirshner, and I will definitely get Glenn Kirshner on, and I want to discuss this whole world of pardons with him. I think that would be really interesting, so stand by because we are going to go. I'll definitely have Glenn Kirshner. So if you want to hear an interview with Glenn Kirshner, 30-year former federal prosecutor, subscribe to this channel because that will be very soon. I promise you that. Will Cassidy have security? I believe that she will. I cannot imagine a world in which she doesn't have security. The question is, like, how long do you have this security? How long are you subjected to, like, looking over your shoulder? I know that when we heard from Shamos and Lady Ruby a week ago, it's kind of upended their lives, and their lives still haven't gone back to normal. Lady Ruby said she used to say her name out loud. She's afraid that when people acknowledge her, that it'll incite some type of violence, and so she doesn't like when people say her name anymore. This is a testament to the fact that these people rely on violence to achieve their political ends. How do we get Republicans to watch and discuss reality? I think that the important thing here is, to keep paying attention to these hearings, even if it's not Republicans. A lot of what this has to do with is showing Democrats, showing independents, showing all the people who came out and voted in 2020 the importance of voting again and just understanding what's at stake here. You know, if the same amount of people who voted in 2020 voted in 2022, we would win no problem because Democrats won nearly across the board. So I think in terms of, getting Republicans, I have no doubt that some Republicans are going to hear this stuff just by virtue of it being in the news. And that's what you can hope for, especially when the margins are so thin in states like Wisconsin, for example. Biden won the state of Wisconsin by 3 votes per precinct. So when the margins are that small, even just holding these hearings and making sure that people are paying attention, and they are paying attention, by the way, is important because that increases the likelihood of just some of these people, a few of these people, 1 or 2% of these people recognizing, okay, there's a lot of Republican witnesses, there's a lot of evidence, there's a lot of testimony and sworn deposition, a lot of Trump world figures. We have Bill Barr, we have Ivanka, we have Alex Cannon, we have Hirschman. All of these people are admitting that maybe what I'm hearing from the Trump folks isn't true. And so even if it's just like 1 or 2%, that is enough to push people in these elections to recognize that, like, okay, this is what the truth is. This is what the truth isn't. And so I think like those margins will matter. If you missed any of this, by the way, this video will be on my channel under the live streams playlist. Who called to intimidate the witnesses? We don't know yet. We know that there were texts or messages sent to these people, but we don't know who actually sent them. That we'll find out, I believe, in subsequent hearings. If Trump is prosecuted, what influence will his appointed Supreme Court justices have, if any? So I believe if Trump is prosecuted, it'll be in a jury. It'll be in a jury trial. So the Supreme Court wouldn't have any say over what can happen because if somebody is convicted in a jury trial, the Supreme Court doesn't have any say over that. Again, that's something that I'll clarify when I do interviews with federal prosecutors. I'll be able to get that information, no problem. And by the way, I know that people are paying attention because somebody just let me know that 188,000 people watched on the PBS stream earlier. 188,000 people. I had, I think, roughly between 155 and 200,000 on this stream. That number will continue to go up as people catch these hearings later. And they're watching on a number of other channels that I saw streaming while I was streaming. And of course, we usually get into the tens of millions of people actually watching through their Nielsen ratings, through their TVs. So people are paying attention. I think that's exactly what needs to happen. If we can pick off a few Republicans who are willing to admit, who are willing to acknowledge objective reality, that's important, especially in an environment where just 1 or 2% of people flipping is so important, so significant, has such great impacts. And then, of course, you have independents who are the people who go from Obama to Trump to Biden. I mean, those are the people that we have to reach as well. And lastly, and something that, I try to do, that's something that's important to me, is like inspiring turnout among Democrats, because I know that, when Trump is in office, it's one thing and people are amped up because we hear the Trump bullshit every single day. And even if you're not political, it inspires you to turn out to vote. And then when Biden's in office, it's a little more boring and it's not all about the Trump show every single day. And so people kind of lose that enthusiasm to go and vote. And I think that it's important to show that, like, even though Trump isn't on the ballot, everything that we do right now is going to be so important in terms of what happens in 2024, especially keeping Congress in Democratic control so that they can't do exactly what they tried to do in 2020, again, if and when Trump runs in 2024. And also, B, look at the issues that are facing us right now with climate change, with women's reproductive rights, with gun safety. None of that's going to change if people don't turn out and allow Republicans to just run roughshod over Democrats in terms of the legislation that they're looking to pass. If you think that the Supreme Court overruling Roe is bad enough unto itself, just imagine when we get, just like we're seeing in the States, these blanket abortion bans nationwide. That is the natural progression of what we're seeing in the Supreme Court right now. So if that's important to you, then I hope that bolsters turnout, even among Democrats. And look, people that are watching this, I've polled my chat before. I know that roughly a quarter of people watching are from swing states. So they're from Florida, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Ohio, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, Michigan, Wisconsin. And if you live in one of those states, or you have friends or family in one of those states, or you have somebody connected to you who's not political or sees themselves as more in the middle, explain to them the stakes and do your part to get like 1 or 2 people registered and persuaded to vote. That's it. And again, I explained this a few minutes ago, but if you don't think that persuading 1 or 2 people will have an impact, remember, in Wisconsin, Biden won by 3 votes per precinct. If 3 votes per precinct were flipped, Trump would have won the state of Wisconsin. So just a few votes, a few people persuaded. And I know we have them. I have them in my own family. And if you think that because what I do, I'm able to persuade everybody, it doesn't work like that. I do my best, but like we all have people in our lives who haven't voted before, who aren't political, who don't care, who think the whole system is corrupt. I get it. But the stakes are really high right now. And what we're facing with, what we're being faced with is not only these attacks on our democracy that we've learned about from these January 6th hearings, but even less esoterically, these attacks on women's reproductive rights, on abortion rights, on, guns being flooded into the streets of states that have refused to allow concealed carry permits to be issued. So all of this stuff is stuff that touches our lives. It's not so vague and like theoretical political stuff. It's not just like, inflation and migrant caravans. Like this is stuff that we feel. People are afraid to go to school and out in public because gun violence runs so rampant these days. People are afraid to deal with the whole issue of abortion because they don't know whether they're going to be able to get care. So this is only going to get worse. So I hope people recognize that and recognize the importance of not only staying engaged and voting themselves, but taking care of your circle. And that's the most important thing. Even with what I do, like I reach a lot of people every month. The most valuable thing to me is when I get emails saying I haven't voted before, I wasn't registered to vote, I've registered to vote now, and I voted in this last election, or I'm going to vote in this next election. Those are the things that mean the most. If I reach 20 million people a month, it is those 3 emails that I get from people that mean the most. So, everybody can do that in their own circles, and it makes a huge difference. So with that said, I'll leave it at that. Again, one last note, if you haven't yet subscribed to this channel, please subscribe. It's free. And if you want to listen to my podcast, check out No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen. It's on Google Podcasts, Apple, Spotify, every single podcast platform. That's a great way to support my work too. That's also free. So definitely check those out. Those are great ways to help me. I'll leave it there and hope to see you for this next January 6th committee hearing at some point in July. Thank you so much.